So you guys are seeing the agenda, right? That says Payroll 101.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first thing I just wanted to do was review the LACA website and make sure that Courtney's familiar with that. So when you come to the LACA website, if you haven't been here before, here is the home page, which they'll have some sort of current news feed going in the middle of the page. I like this quick links button at the left. It takes you to a bunch of links for even student services, a bunch of different teams here at LACA, but the fiscal services links, this you can quickly access a lot of our software by clicking any of these buttons here. And our fiscal services page, if you click services and then select fiscal services, we have a couple pages here. So this gives you our fiscal team phone number. Of course, you can still call the LACA main line, but this fiscal team number rings directly to me and Mary right now. And then our fiscal@laca.org email address, which opens a help desk ticket. So Mary and I are both monitoring that. And actually Dean is monitoring that as well. So if one of us are out, that's your quickest route to get help. And then we have links for documentation that we have created for our districts. And we have links to software manuals. And then at the bottom, we have links to a couple additional things. So over on the right, you see meetings that are upcoming. On the fiscal page, the meeting list is just fiscal meetings. On the main page, you'll see student team meetings, InfoHio meetings, special ed meetings. You'll see all of LACA's meetings. But you can click any of these links and then register online to indicate that you plan to attend these meetings if you're interested. As for the fiscal documentation, if you go to the LACA payroll page, you have links to all of these documents that we have out there. And for fiscal year end, I need to put the new FY20 documentation out there, but you can click a link here and get the LACA closing checklist. You can get any supporting documentation that we will talk about during the fiscal year end training. There's helpful documentation on mid-year contract changes, new contracts and salary notices using Safari, which we have a recording available on Safari if Courtney is going to be using that. But there's a lot of documentation out here that could hopefully help you. We have a page for accounting documentation, equipment inventory documentation, eFinance Plus documentation, EMIS related fiscal documentation, so submitting the 5-year forecast or staff EMIS reporting documentation. But we hope this can help you do your job a little bit more easier, and if you find there's something that you're looking for that's missing, just let us know and we'll get it out there.
And it is wonderful documentation, I'm just going to say. But I sometimes have to call Carrie and say, I can't find it.
Well, that's good to know, but that's what we're here for, so we'll help you find what you need.
Always do. You'd always do.
And then the software manuals, you might use Bear a little bit to search for reports, per pay reports, monthly, quarterly, fiscal year end reports. So there's a user guide on that, but I really think Bear's pretty user friendly, that you'll just be able to log in and navigate through and find what you need. There's a manual on kiosk, which is helpful if your staff are asking you questions about kiosk, a RAM user guide, and then the USAS, USPS, EIS, and WebGap manuals, a USAS Web separate guide and a USPS Web separate guide. But looking at this one for USAS, USPS, you would click that link. It takes you to the state software development teams page. They're the organization that actually maintains the software. And then you can click USPS and pick any of these USPS user guides. So if you click like this USPS user guide, for instance, not the reference manual or the personnel or the system manager, whenever you get into one of these user guides, you can navigate using the table of contents, or if you search up here at the top, it actually searches all of those manuals. So even though you selected user guide, it's searching the reference manual, the system manager's manual, and I find that helpful. So you don't need to know which user guide to go into to get to the information you're looking for. And the page I clicked on, USP screen, we'll look at that today. But just to let you know that this information is out there, if you're wanting a more thorough description of a certain field in the software, or if you're looking for a certain process that you're running and you want a more in-depth explanation, there is a manual out here that might be helpful to you. Okay, so that's the LACA website. So hopefully that is a good resource for you. And then the first thing that we're going to talk about today is account structure. So we used to not do a session on account structure at the beginning of a payroll class, but we learned that payroll users need to understand the account code and how that's impacting the budget. So we actually explain account structure first and build a good foundation understanding the account code that you'll see for people's pay accounts and for employer share of insurance, those different accounts that you're going to see as you're processing transactions in payroll. So the account structure that we will talk about, the account structure of 4 different types of accounts. There's cash accounts, appropriation accounts, budget accounts, and revenue accounts. So looking first at the cash account, it is made up of a transaction indicator, a fund, and a special cost center. So the transaction indicator is probably going to be the one that you're least familiar with because in a lot of the screens it's hidden and you don't even see it. It indicates the type of transaction that you're processing. So for instance, if you're working with an expense or an encumbrance or a receipt, it indicates that. But since the different screens are normally so focused on one type of transaction, there's only one transaction indicator that's available in a screen. So it's hidden from your view and you normally don't even have to worry about it. The fund is a 3-digit code that typically you'll see like 001 for general fund, 200s or 300s for student activity accounts, 400s for state grants, 500s for federal funds. So it's a 3-digit code, 3-digit field that identifies the fund. Then there's the special cost center that's part of the cash account, and that is district defined. But if it starts with a 9, so it's in the 9,000s, then it identifies a separate cash account. If it's not in the 9,000s, your district may still use that just to track money, but it's actually not setting the money aside in a separate cash account unless it starts with a 9. But those 4 digits are district defined. Examples of those, you might see all zeros. So general fund, you would see a fund 001, special cost center 0000. Or for those student activity accounts where we saw a fund of a 200 or a 300, you might see a special cost center of like 910A, 910B, something indicating a certain student activity like student council at a certain building, maybe even, or a special cost center you might commonly see right now is like 9020 or 9120 to indicate FY20. Some treasurers use that so that they can very easily identify their separate cash accounts for grant years. So like the federal special ed IDEA funds, you would see 5169020 possibly. So the cash account is truly tracking cash on hand. So your treasurer is probably more worried about the cash account than you are. You won't be using the cash account in any screens in payroll, but everything that you work with on the budget account level is impacting the cash account. And you might see warnings about a cash account being negative or over budget. So just keep that in mind. The cash account is this larger account that everything else is feeding up into. Then there's an appropriation account, and the dimensions of the appropriation account are the transaction indicator, which we saw also on the cash account, the fund, which we also saw on the cash account, and the special cost center down there at the bottom of the list, which we saw in the cash account. But there's also a 4-digit function and a 3-digit object code. Now, of that 4-digit function, only the first 2 digits are used on an appropriation account, and that function code is describing the type of activity that's being performed. So in payroll, you might see an 1100 for regular instruction, or like a 2400 for admin. Then the object account is a 3-digit code defining the activity in more detail. It identifies like the type of service you're providing, or on the AP side, the type of good that you're buying. So the object code might be a 100 for salary, a 200 for benefits. And again, on the appropriation account, you're just using that first digit. The budget account is more specifically defined, and this is the one that you're going to work with and see in pay screen, or you're going to see on purchase orders as you post the gross payroll expense, or you post the employer share of insurance. So the budget account has a lot of those different dimensions that we've seen on the other types of accounts: the transaction indicator, fund, function, object, special cost center. Then we see some new dimensions. The subject area is a 6-digit code that's defined by the EMIS manual. And at our last payroll roundtable, we talked about EMIS a little bit. So EMIS is a reporting to ODE, where you have to report all of your expenditures, all of your payroll information to ODE, all of your student information. And so that subject area is from the EMIS manual, and it's the actual area of instruction. So you might see like an 050000 for English, or an 020000 for art. So it's truly like a subject area that you would think of in school. You're identifying that this person that you're paying is in that specific subject area. And we advise, which this is up to your treasurer, how detailed you're going to be, but we advise just using the first 2 digits of those 6 available digits, just so that as the EMIS manual changes every year and they identify different subjects, you're not having to make very many changes. You're just using the broad category of English or art or math, so that you are not having to change your budget accounts every year. The next dimension is the operational unit, which you'll probably hear me call the OPU, and that is also district defined. How the special cost center was district defined, the OPU is district defined, but most districts use that to identify a building or a department. So you'll see maybe like an 001 to identify the district office, 002 to identify the elementary, and so forth. Some districts use like 100, 200, 300. I don't know what you guys use, but it's a way for you to track whether an expenditure is related to a certain building or department. Then there's the instructional level, and that indicates the grade level. So 00 would be all grades district-wide. Then you have 01 for first grade, 02 for second grade, and so forth. 13 is preschool, 14 is kindergarten, 15 is post-secondary, 16 is multiple grades. But if you see that instructional level, it normally just tells you the grade level at a quick glance, 03, third grade, so that you know where that teacher is teaching, or where that item that you're purchasing through AP is ending up in what grade level classroom. Then the final dimension of the budget account is the job assignment. And this is district defined as well, but a lot of districts use the position code from the EMIS manual if they are using the job assignment. So a 108 is a principal, so you might see that on some pay account for a principal, or a 230 is a teacher, or I mean, the job assignment is not really required, so you might just see all zeros. But this is the budget account is the account that you're going to work with in your pay screens and on purchase orders. So this is the one that you're going to become the most familiar with, but it also has the most dimensions available. So there's a lot in that budget account to interpret and understand what it's telling you. The fourth type of account that we mentioned is the revenue account. So it is made up of a 2-digit transaction indicator, 3-digit fund, a 4-digit receipt code, which we have not talked about yet, the 4-digit special cost center, the 6-digit subject area, and the 3-digit OPU. So the receipt, we haven't talked about that one. That is assigned by the Auditor of State. So hopefully you have seen the AOS USAS manual by now. And that is a nice handy manual. It's very lengthy, but it defines all of these different dimensions and what they mean. So for instance, on a receipt code, you might see a 1,500 for food service, a 1,600 for extracurricular, 1,800 for miscellaneous. And you might see more detailed, instead of just the first 2 digits being used, you might see like 1,511 to define food service in more detail to mean student breakfast, 1,512 for student lunch, and so forth. So some of the aspects, even though they may be defined by the EMIS manual or the ALS manual, it's up to your treasurer how specific they're going to be. So there are differences from district to district in which dimensions are more detailed, which dimensions are more vague, and which dimensions you use if they're optional. So from district to district, we do see some differences, but most of the aspects are defined in some way by AOS or the EMIS manual. So it kind of ends up being like a separate language that you start to learn and understand. These account codes start to talk to you. So back to the cash account. I had mentioned that it's actually tracking the cash on hand. So it is what you're going to reconcile with the bank statement each month. So as you post expenditures, cash decreases. As you post receipts, cash increases. So an example of a cash account would be transaction indicator 00, fund 001, special cost 0000, and that's your general fund cash account. Another example, the transaction indicator 00, fund 590, special cost 9020, would be title funds for FY20. Talking about the appropriation account again, this is an account that you actually use for reporting for audit purposes. It tracks the estimated and actual expenditures, but I did mention that the function code is only the first 2 digits and the object code is only the first digit. So it's a very general account. And an example of an appropriation account is transaction indicator 01, fund 001, function 1100, object 100, special cost all zeros, and that would be general fund instructional salaries. So kind of building on the cash account, you see general fund, the 01 transaction indicator, the fund 001, and the special costs with all zeros. That's telling me general fund. But then when you add in the function and the object, the 1100 is telling me instructional, and the object is telling me salary. The second example on the screen, the transaction indicator 01, fund 590, function 2900, object 100, special cost 9020. That would be for federal title funds, specifically for a function of support services and an object of salary. So these appropriation accounts actually roll up into the cash accounts that we saw on the previous screen. So any activity in these appropriation accounts are impacting those same cash accounts we just talked about. Then in more detail, the budget account, it further breaks down those estimated and actual expenditures and uses all 9 dimensions that are available to you. And the examples on the screen, again, we stuck with a general fund example and that federal title fund. So the first one on your screen, you see the transaction indicator, the O2 indicating the expenditure account. The fund 001, function 1110, that 1110 is a little bit more specific than we saw 1100 for the appropriation account. So the 1100 was telling us instructional. The 1110 is being more specific in telling us elementary instruction. Then the object, again, is more specific than the appropriation account was. This is a 111, so that's telling us certificated regular salary, not just where the 100 was generally salary. Then the special cost of all zeros, a subject of all zeros in this case, an OPU, which again is district defined, but that could identify a certain building, the instructional level of 01, meaning first grade, and then the job of all zeros. If your district were using that, there could be a number in there. But so that first line is telling me general fund, elementary instruction, certificated regular salary at a specific building for first grade. The second line, the difference you see in 1120 in the function instead of 1110, you see a different OPU and a different instructional level. So this second line is telling me that this purchase, if you're spending out of this account, is general fund middle school instruction, certificated regular salary at a different building, but grade 6. And then the last one on the screen is the federal title money. So you still see that 590 in the fund and the 9020 in the special cost center. So it's the FY20 federal title fund. The 2940 is staff support service. The 490 is other purchase services. So you won't really see that in your payroll account. This is more an example of one that you would see go through accounts payable for a contracted service, and then a different OPU of 950. So I hope this is starting to make some sense, but the budget account is the one that you're really going to see in your screens and work more closely with. And it's just good to understand that all of these different aspects of the account code mean something. So when you're looking at somebody's pay screen, or you're looking at a purchase order for gross payroll expense or board share of insurance, it's hopefully jumping out at you that these are the correct accounts or these are incorrect accounts and something needs fixed. Looking at a revenue account example, the revenue account, again, tracks the estimated and actual receipts. In the examples on the screen, the first one is general fund. So you still see that fund 001 and the special cost of all zeros. The receipt code of 1111, the 1111 is property tax. The second example there, the 1213, that is an example of special education tuition. You see a special cost of 0086. We gave that example just to let you know that that's not a separate cash account. This is still in the general fund because it doesn't start with a 9, but your treasurer is wanting to track this special education tuition and be able to run separate reports on it from the basic general fund of all zeros. And then the third example is federal title funds for FY20. The 4220 means restricted grants from the federal government. So you're receiving money in for title funds. And since the special cost starts with a 9, it is a separate cash account. So here's some examples on your screen with multiple account types on the same screen. In this, we try to just explain that, like if you start at the bottom of the screen, there's 2 budget accounts, one for first grade salary, one for high school salary. Those 2 budget accounts roll up into that appropriation account for regular teacher salary, and then that appropriation account rolls up into the cash account. So you're working down at the specific budget account level, but everything you're doing is impacting an appropriation account and then is also impacting a cash account. So as you're posting transactions at the budget account level, you might not see only warnings on budget accounts, but you may also see warnings on appropriation accounts and cash accounts, and that's why. So you can see why these roll into each other, because the budget accounts are in that same fund, same special cost center. The function of 1130 and 1110, that rolls up into the 1100s, and the object of 111 rolls up into the 100s, and then the same from the appropriation to the cash account. Those kind of roll up into each other. So when you're posting an expenditure, not only are you impacting the budget account, but you're also impacting the appropriation account and the cash account. If you're issuing a purchase order for your gross payroll, then the encumbrances in the budget account and the appropriation account are increased. And then when you issue a check against that purchase order, it liquidates the funds off the purchase order, and that reduces the encumbrances on those accounts, and it increases the expenditure on those accounts at that time. It also decreases cash at that time when the check is issued, not when the purchase order is issued. So looking at a revenue account, which you'll work with a little less frequently, but again, I kind of start at the bottom of this slide and think about, there's two examples on this screen, but the revenue account, the very specific revenue account where you're receiving money for student lunches, for example, that rolls up into the food service cash account. And then the other example on the screen, the general property tax revenue account, rolls up into the general fund cash account. And whenever a receipt is posted, the revenue account is updated, the actual received amount is increased, and the cash account also is updated by increasing the receipt amount as well. So that's just, those couple slides are just to explain that even though you're working at the budget account level or the revenue account level, you're still impacting appropriation accounts and cash accounts. So different resources that might be helpful to you as you're getting comfortable with account codes. There's one in Reflections called Rev Edit, and it lists the different account dimensions. It pulls those down from the Auditor of State's office. So you also could be looking at the AOS manual instead. But if you actually want to run the report in Reflections, it's available there as well. And it will list the fund, function, object, instructional level, and receipt codes. If you are looking for subject codes, those are in the EMIS manual instead. They're not on this Rev Edit. And if you were looking for special cost center or OPU, since those are district defined, you would have to consult someone at your district, or if you guys have a list somewhere, maybe for OPUs, you probably have a list of which OPUs mean which buildings or which departments. And then the job is district defined, but it might correlate to the EMIS manual. So that Rev Edit, if you were running it in Reflections, this is what you would see on your screen. It asks you one question: do you really want to create this listing? Yes or no? So you say yes, and it creates a report called revedit.txt. When you view that, it looks like this on your screen, and it just defines each of those aspects: the fund, the function, object, instructional level, and receipt. So it's very similar to the AOS manual if you've looked at that, but it's right in the software if you want to generate it in the software if you don't have your AOS manual handy. Another report that's available in the software is called Chart, and this is more specific to your district. This is a listing of all of your budget and revenue accounts and the corresponding description. Some descriptions pull in from the Auditor of State manual, but your treasurer has the ability to change account code descriptions in your database if they want to. So this might be helpful as you're getting used to your specific accounts at your district. And when you're running it these are the questions you'll see on your screen. You can select to run it for all funds or just certain funds. You can select how you would like to sort the resulting report, and then it creates chart.txt. So then if you view chart.txt, this is what you would see. And instead of just seeing the individual dimensions of the account code, so just the function defined, this is looking at the entire account code string altogether and looking at that description that's been assigned to that account code. So not just the different dimensions of the account code that we saw on RevEdit or that you see in the AOS manual. This defines the entire account with it all put together. So I mentioned the AOS manual, which hopefully you've started looking at already, but I also provided a link there to that. So that's provided by the Ohio Auditor of State. Any thoughts or questions on account structure? It might seem overwhelming at first, or maybe this makes complete sense to you, but if it seems overwhelming, just keep in the back of your mind that these account codes, every aspect of the account code means something. So you have to pay attention to it and make sure that you're charging the appropriate account so that you're not taking your district over budget in a wrong account where your treasurer has not budgeted money. So the different dimensions will start meaning more to you as you use them and become more comfortable with them. But just pay attention to those account codes when we see those in screens or on purchase orders, and try to start identifying the different aspects and different dimensions so that you're more confident in identifying a correct account versus an incorrect account.
Yeah, and Courtney, you'll get used to those the more you see them, especially like what Carrie was saying in payroll. They're kind of like set up per building and per specification of what they might be teaching or whatever. So after a while, they'll just become second nature to you. So don't freak out about having to know that or even really understanding all of that right now. Just have the concept of what that number is and that it is relevant when you're keying those in.
And most, like, you're coming into an existing payroll system, so everybody's already been assigned a pay account. So it's not like you're going to have to come and assign pay accounts right at the beginning or anything. But it's just good to know as you set up new teachers, new staff, look at the person who was in that position previously. Is this person in the same grade, in the same building? Is there any reason I should be selecting a different pay account, or can I keep the same pay account? I didn't have this type of instruction when I started payroll, so I learned the accounts as I went, and I realized that I had made some mistakes, and mistakes are all fixable. But I think it just helps to have some sort of foundation to build on, just that these different dimensions mean different things, and then that'll start to click with you, hopefully, as you work with the accounts. So the next PowerPoint presentation that I shared with you is about USP Screen, and we will look at that next, but I'm going to move through this in the software so you can actually see it live instead of just paging through the PowerPoint slides, but I'll follow right along with the PowerPoint so that you hopefully don't have to keep a ton of notes. Are you currently seeing a blue reflection screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Yes,
Okay.
I can see it as well.
So when you go into reflections for the first time, it is older software. We are actually starting to convert our districts to the redesign, a new web-based state software. So you actually have to use your keyboard a lot. You can't point and click with a mouse. So you can navigate through the software by entering like a 1 and hitting enter, and it takes you to the next menu. And then you can say, I want to go to 2, payroll, and hit enter, and it walks you through different menus until you get to different screens. Or a lot of times if you know the name of the program you're trying to get to, you can just type it at a menu prompt. And when I say menu prompt, just where your cursor is blinking next to the word menu and a caret. So you can type shortcuts and that'll take you into screens instead of navigating through the menu if you don't want to pick different options on the menu, or you can pick the different options on the menu to get there. So if I type USP screen and then enter to continue, this is where you're going to spend a lot of your time updating employee records, entering people's contract information, their pay account, looking up their paychecks if they're having questions for you, entering deduction changes. So you're going to spend a lot of your time here. So we're going to walk through each of these screens and explain the different fields on these screens. You will not remember everything I say, but hopefully it'll just help you get a little bit more familiar with these screens so that when you're in here for the first time, you can make a little bit more sense of it. And another thing I advise the first time you log in and you're trying to get familiar with these screens is search for yourself and look at the record that's been entered for you. And your data already makes sense to you, so that'll help you understand what you're seeing on the screens. So I'll just walk through each of these screens. So if I enter one and hit enter, it's going to take me into browse screen. And the browse screen contains the most information of all of the screens we're going to look at today. So it's linked to all of the different screens. So it takes the longest to open. How you kind of saw the blue screen there for a little bit. It was just a little slow on opening, which is fine. But that screen does seem to take the longest to open up. So the first thing that I see on my screen is a record for the default employee. And this default employee has an ID of all ones. So everybody has this in their district database, and you can maintain the default employee to your benefit. So if you find yourself always typing the exact same answer in a field, you can come enter that information on the default employee, and then it will pre-populate on new records going forward. So for instance, if I arrow down with my arrow key and select a city tax and hit enter, I can see that I've pre-populated a tax percentage of 1.75% on this Newark tax, and I've identified this as a C for work-based, compensation-based. So in our sample database, we're saying that the typical employee is going to have a New York City tax based on where they work, not based on where they live. And that tax percentage is 1.75. So by maintaining that information in those fields on this default employee, when I add a New York City deduction to anybody going forward, those fields are going to be pre-populated for me, and then I just need to save the record. So as you get into your database, if you're hand typing the same information in a field over and over again, remember you have this default employee out there that you can update and maintain to make your life easier. But I will first pull up, I think Richard Gere is in here. I'll pull up an employee so we actually see some information that looks a little bit more familiar than looking at a default record. And we'll explain everything that we're seeing here. So you first saw that I searched for this employee. I used my tab key and went over and typed Richard Gere's last name. You also could type part of the first name with the last name. So if you're looking for like a Smith, some name that's common in your district and you want to narrow it down, you can identify part of the first name to jump directly to that employee. And then after I type that information on that find line, I'm clicking F11, and that tells me that at the bottom that F11 is find. So after I typed that last name, I hit F11 and that searched in my database for the matching employee with that last name. If this was not the correct employee, I could then hit F10 to jump to the next employee in the database, to another employee with the last name of Gear, or alphabetically the next person with a G in the database. If I did not know their last name, but instead knew their social security number or ID, then I could search in this first field as well. But I find the last name normally the one that you're looking for. So that conceal flag that you see over there is saying right now, yes, conceal employees if they're marked conceal, yes. Or when searching, if I would rather search and see all employees, even if they're concealed, so they haven't worked with me for a very long time, then I would change that to an N to include concealed employees. But typically you're just going to search with the default and you're just going to see your current employees. But if you're setting up like a new sub, and as you're trying to add this sub, you're getting a warning message that the individual's social security number is already on file, then you might need to tab over and change that conceal to a no to see that sub record that has been concealed in your database. Okay, so what else do we see on the browse screen? That's how you find an employee in a certain screen. But when you come into browse screen, you see links to all these other screens that we will look at. So you see their ID and name, and then you see their biographical information, a snapshot of that biographical information. And if I hit enter on this line, it's going to jump me into the bio screen. If I arrow down, and the next line is dem screen, so the demographic information, if I hit enter, it will take me into that screen. Then I can F8, and that shows me that at the bottom to return back to browse screen. So this screen links you to all of the other screens that are in USP screen on this specific employee. So you can very quickly access all of the information related to this employee. It also gives you the ability to view paychecks for this person. So at the bottom, it's telling you the F17. So if you look at a keyboard, you're going to use those function keys across the top. And there is no F17. So in order to add 10, you hit Shift and then F7. And your Shift F7 uses and adds 10 to 7 and gets F17 to view those employee checks. The browse screen is also where we advise you add new employee records. And after we go through all these screens, we will add a new employee so you can see that process. So at the very end, we'll come back and look at browse screen again to go through the add process. But let me Shift F7 to return to this browse screen view that we were looking at and keep going. We have the link to the Ben screen, so the benefit information, a link to all the different deduction screens, job screen, position screen, pay screen. So there you're seeing that pay account on the screen, that budget account that we were talking about previously. And then you also see that this is screen 1 of 2. So if I page down, I can access screen 2. And then this individual could have screen 3 as well if they had a lot of jobs and a lot of information. But this individual just has 2 jobs, so he rolls onto the second screen. And we see his second job information, his position record tied to that job, his pay account tied to that job, and then a link to the attendance screen for this individual. So again, you just arrow down and enter on any of these different screens that you want to jump to and look at for this individual, or I can page back up to go back up to the top. If we look in more detail at that F17, so Shift F7, if you have an employee asking you questions about their check stub, this is your snapshot in the system of all of their different paychecks. So this list is going to continue to grow as you run payrolls, and you arrow down and can select a certain paycheck to look at. You also have options at the bottom of your screen. So this is identifying what the different function keys will let you do. One that I want to point out is the sort option. So F18, which is Shift and F8. is going to give you the ability to sort this paycheck information by pay date or by pay date descending. So or by check number. But if I pick pay date, now you can see I'm going oldest to newest. And this is probably how yours is going to default when you come in here the first time. So I'm pointing this out because you're probably going to want to change that. So you're going to do Shift F8, and you're probably going to prefer pay date descending to have the newest always at the top. There's also an option down here to select, and this is S6, which there's no S keys on your keyboard. So the control key converts your function keys into S keys. So to access an item that's labeled S6, we're going to hit Control F6. And one document that I shared with you was helpful function keys and shortcuts. And I think you're probably seeing that on the screen now. But this will help you with that, with those little tips and tricks of how to access different keys. So like I don't know that I have S6 on here, but here's S8 and S7, and that's telling you in order to actually click that key, you're going to have to hold Control and hit F8 or Control and F7. So if you forget that, this 2-page document might be helpful for you to have as you're starting to maneuver in reflections for the first time, so that you don't have to remember all that information at first. And then it has some keyboard shortcuts there, reminding you that you need to use your tab key to move between the different fields, and what some other keyboard shortcuts can help you do to move to previous fields or go to the end of a field. So this document will probably help you at first until you become more familiar. Okay, so back to reflections and looking at this check stub. You see my F17 at the bottom now says View Employee, so that's going to jump me back to the employee view of Browse Screen. So that just flips between the two, Let's View Check Stubs or Let's View the Employee. But if you would like to see a pay stub, which I don't know if Brenda's shown you any of this at all yet, or if this is all new, but you would just arrow down and select the pay stub that you wish to look at and hit enter. That's how you select it when you're on the desired line. And then you see that check number, the pay date, gross and net pay, and you see all of the jobs that the individual was paid for on this paycheck. Another thing that I like to point out is that you see date ranges here. So when you actually run a payroll, you're going to initialize that payroll using a program, INICAL, which I call INICAL. You might hear it called Initical, Inical, different things. But when you initialize your payroll, you enter a date range that you're paying this individual for. And I think it's nice to know that that date range is always preserved here. So you know on the January 31st pay stub, this person was paid for January 16th through January 31st. And it could be different from one job to the next because you have the control over that when you're initializing which pay groups are initialized for which date ranges. So you're also seeing the job title that this individual was paid for, and you're seeing pay types. So on this individual, we see a reg pay type and an accrual pay type. So the reg is regular pay, so that person worked their regular job 11 days at $500 and earned this amount of money. The accrual line is a result of this individual being paid an even pay all year long, regardless of the number of days that were on the calendar during the date range processed in the payroll. So in this payroll, 11 work days fell between January 16th and January 31st. But if this person is to be paid $5,000 a pay, even though they earn $5,500, you're only paying them $5,000. So a negative $500 is accrued to bring you down to the $5,000 pay per period. So this is happening because, for instance, your teachers and principals may have time off in the summer, but you want them to continue being paid in the summer. So they're going to earn all of their money throughout the school year, and you're going to keep a little bit back every pay in order to pay them over the summer or over holiday breaks. So the system is doing that automatically. As you initialize payroll, it's looking at the calendars and counting and saying, okay, this person is earning 11 days of pay, and I'm accruing the difference to bring me to the pay per period. Sometimes this accrued amount is positive, sometimes it's negative, but that's what you're seeing here is how many days were earned and how much money was accrued to get to that equal pay per period amount that you want to pay the person this pay. We're seeing the same on their coaching position in this instance. And then below that, we are seeing any leave that this person took during this payroll. So this person did not take any sick leave, but has a balance of 1.25 days as of this January 31st pay stub. They didn't use vacation and they didn't have any vacation to use. And they used one personal day, leaving a remaining balance of a half day. So this is a nice snapshot of somebody's leave balances and what absences pulled in during a payroll. There's another screen, Ben screen, that we will look at that shows their actual current balance, but this is a snapshot that was in effect during this payroll. And then you notice that right now we're on screen 1 of 3, so I'm going to page down. So I'm going to use my page down key on the keyboard to go to screen 2. And here I see all of the deduction information that was processed with this payroll. So all of those amounts that were withheld for taxes, retirement, and how much money was sent to their direct deposit. So this is nice when somebody's asking you questions of what was withheld, or if you're researching something to see what was withheld during a certain pay. You see the employee share and the board share. So you see like the employee share of STRS, the board share of STRS on this principal. That jumps out at me right away that the STRS share was not the same as the board share. Right now, STRS is at 14%, but back in 2015, they were not. So our sample database is a little out of date. But if you're researching issues, it's nice to see what was actually withheld for the different deduction. And if your employee has a lot of deductions, this might roll on to the next screen, but this person, all of theirs fits on one screen. So if I page down to see what's on screen 3, I see the pay account information that was used during this payroll. So there's the pay account for the principal job. So $5,000 was charged to this general fund account, and $500 was charged to this coaching account. So the 113 is a stipend, object code 111 is regular certified salary. The other thing you're seeing over here, besides the amount that's charged to each account, is a yes or no flag for Board Dis and Leave Pro. I don't think you guys use Leave Pro, but Leave Pro is a program that's available in the system to charge leave, so absences, to a different account than the pay account. So if your district was using Leave Pro, you would run Leave Pro and it would switch this pay account to the same dimensions of that account code, except it would swap out this object code and charge that to a leave object. But I don't think you guys use that. But what this, you don't? Okay, I was going to say, but what this is saying is if you were charging the leave to a different account, so that one personal day that this principal took during this payroll, then you would be saying you want to charge it to this fund function, special cost subject, OPU, instructional level, and job. But you don't want to charge it to this one because it was a result of his principal job, not his coaching job. So if you don't use that you won't really have to worry about this column. But the board dis flag is very similar, and I do believe you guys use that for Medicare and possibly insurances too.
Yes.
But so what that is saying is you're answering yes or no on these different pay accounts, and we'll see pay screen where you identify that. But this is a snapshot of what was in effect when you ran this specific payroll, saying that the board share of insurance or the board share of Medicare or the board share of retirement, you would like charged to this account related to the main job, but potentially not this coaching job, is how this was answered. So board dis takes part of this pay account, so like the fund function, special cost, subject, OPU, instructional level, and job, and swaps out the object code and puts a 200 board benefit object code in its place, but charges those board benefits based on the rest of the pay account. And this one being a no is saying that when I ran this payroll, I didn't want any board share of benefits charged to the coaching account because his insurance is a result of his main job. So there is also, when you run the board dis program, a way to say, ignore these flags. I don't care what I said. I want Medicare, for example, charged out to everything. But that's the board dis. We discussed that in a later class. But I just wanted to show you what you're seeing here on the screen, the pay account that was charged and how those flags were answered. And then how those flags were answered impacts programs that you'll see later in the payroll process. So we'll come back to browse screen to add an employee record at the end, but are there any other questions about browse screen looking at the employee information or the paycheck information? You can see like a check number on this screen. You can see that it was direct deposit. If you guys still pay anybody by check, that would be listed here. If anybody's pay needs to be voided for any reason, the status would show as void. The information still stays here and you can still access it. It would just show with the status of void so that you knew you voided it. If I go back to the employee details, the next screen that we'll look at is bio screen if there aren't any other questions about browse screen. So you can either access bio screen by arrowing down and entering on this record. So now I'm in bio screen. If I hit F8 now, it's going to return me to browse screen. Or I can F8 to exit browse screen, and then I can enter bio screen by selecting it from this menu. So whichever way you wish to navigate, it takes you to the same screen. So the bio screen is for all of that biographical information about your employee, their social security number, name, address information, birth date. This is even though we're going to add an employee record from browse screen, this is the first record that you add because you need to have that social security number and employee ID on file in order to tie all of the information to this employee. And so looking at these different fields, social security number, the employee ID, you guys probably auto-assign that. I think we only have one district left that does not auto-assign. So your employee ID is going to be a portion of the last name of the employee and then a number. And that number is set up to auto-increment. Some districts increment every 10, every 50, every 100. I don't know how your district is set up, but this employee ID will be automatically generated for you when you save this record. Then you see the conceal flag. So this conceal flag is blank, so it's not concealing this employee. So that comes in handy when you're searching. You might have somebody who says conceal yes if they're an employee who has not worked for you for a very long time. Then you have this state assigned ID and the EMIS ID, and you're probably only going to see one or the other. So the state assigned ID is most likely what you will see on the majority of your staff. So this is their state certificate number that is entered here so that when you report to EMIS, this is how the state is tracking that person. And if it's a non-certified person, so if it's a classified person and they don't have a certificate, then it's going to be what we call a ZID. So you see, I don't have anything assigned here because Richard Gere didn't have a state certificate, so I didn't have a number to enter. And then that ZID is generated. Either when you save the screen, you have the option to generate it, or it can wait and be generated when you submit your data to EMIS. And since this is a sample database, this is not linked to EMIS, so there is no ZID getting assigned. Then you have the name fields and the street, city, state, zip. You have phone number fields that you can enter. You have an OSDI code. So what that is the Ohio School District income tax code that this person resides in. So if they're filling that out for you on a form, I would advise you put that here. If there's an income tax enacted in that school district, by putting it here, when you get to the point where you're adding a deduction to the employee, this code is also on that deduction record, so it will narrow it down and show you just that school district income tax deduction code that is for this specific school district, instead of seeing a list of 15 or 20 school district income taxes that you have to pick from. So if you know the code, I would advise putting it here as you're adding the employee, but then going forward, you have to remember to update that if people move around and file an address change with you. So if this school district does not have an income tax and you're not adding a deduction code right now, this could still be helpful to you by entering it here and keeping it up to date. If the school later enacts an income tax, there is a mass change program in the system that says, go out and find every employee with the OSDI code that I enter and add this new deduction code that I've created so that I can quickly start withholding that new school district tax. But that's what that field is for. Then you see foreign address fields and an email address field. The email address field is going to be the email address that the employee uses to log into the employee kiosk. I don't know if you've been into the employee kiosk yet, Courtney, but
No, she hasn't been in there yet. Was gonna do that the first part of June.
okay. So it gives you access to look up your pay stubs, look up your W-2s. You can see a little bit of your information pulled in from Payroll, like your address, so that you know Payroll has your current address. You might see a little bit of your job contract information. But your employees, some of your employees may also submit leave requests in the kiosk or maintain their IPDIPI, so their individual professional development plan for those staff that are required to do that. But this email address that you enter in this screen is the email address that they use as their username when logging into the kiosk. That's how the kiosk knows what payroll information to pull in. It links to this field right here. Then you see gender, marital status, birth date, hire date. So you're entering all that information as you're setting the employee up. Then you see last paid date. This field is updated automatically by the system as you run payrolls. You indicate yes or no if the employee is paid by direct deposit. Yes or no, should they be receiving an email copy of that direct deposit, which I don't know if you guys email yours. Or if
We
you
do
just,
not email.
okay.
It just goes to kiosk, and
Okay.
if they don't have an email address, then we print it off and mail a copy in regular mail.
Okay. And then you have a check distribution field that you can use to sort those ones that you're printing out and mailing. and an eligible retire field, which I actually don't even think this is pulled in for reporting anymore, but you're just answering yes or no. Is that employee eligible for retirement at this point in time? Have they already worked enough that they're eligible to retire? Then there is the ODHS new hire field, and this field is so out of date, old. It's still used, but it should be labeled ODJFS new hire field. And you can see right now that Richard Gere has been reported to ODJFS as a new hire when he was hired back in January of 15. So as you're setting up a new employee, you're either going to leave that blank or you're going to enter a yes so that this new employee is reportable. And then when you run the new hire program, which is a program we talk about later in the payroll process, to report your new employees, the system automatically flips it to an R to track that this employee has been reported.
Hey, Carrie.
Uh-huh.
So that raises a question, because we now use Bonefish and they report all of our new hires for us. So that field is not, as I'm assuming, is not getting updated.
If you're not running new hire anymore, it is not. So then my thought would be you would either want to run new hire at the same time as Bonefish to make sure they're picking up the same employees, or whoever is listed in Bonefish, you could come here and you could change that to an R.
Okay, so I probably need to do that because Christina worked with Bonefish and got that set up, I don't know, probably a year ago. And now that you're talking about that field, I'm like, I wonder how that gets updated.
So you could run new hire right now and probably see a list of all of those ones since you started Bonefish. Confirm that they've been reported and flip the flag,
Okay,
either manually or by running the program.
okay. So I'll do that here sometime. When would that be critical that I would have to have that done?
Probably before you go to the redesign.
Okay, so I have time.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, are you gonna say June 30th? Because I may just like cry.
No.
Okay, so I'll add that to my list of stuff. Are we starting our redesign? Is that gonna be in January that we're starting that? Like
I think you're on the list next spring, so we will probably start at the earliest the end of January.
Okay, that's what I was thinking, that January was gonna be our like, okay, now we need to like start looking at stuff. That was what was on my calendar, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't shooting myself in the foot and it was later than that. So, okay.
Yeah. After W-2 stuff is all done, then we'll consider looking then depending on when you want to parallel. It could be later than that. Could be February or March if you don't parallel right away.
Yeah, I think Glenna was planning on January just because, you know, just payroll in general is a little slower, January, February. There's usually not as much crazy going on. So, okay, I just wanted to make sure. Sorry, interrupt. That just triggered me to ask a question.
That's okay. So I actually think this new hire date pulls over from this hire date. So when you enter their hire date here, it's most likely going to stay the same unless you have some reason to change it. Then the report to EMIS flag. We've talked about EMIS reporting a very little bit, but is this employee reportable to EMIS, yes or no? Your contracted employees, the very basic common answer is your contracted employees are reportable and your subs are not. So you have a flag on the employee and on the job record to indicate if the employee is reportable and if they are reportable, which jobs are reportable, because maybe they are contracted with you as a teacher and then they come in and do sub-custodial work for extra money. And so the teacher job's reportable, but the sub-custodian job is not. But so you have to answer yes or no here in order to get that reporting correct. And then you have the long-term illness field, which is for EMIS reporting as well. And we talk about that at the fiscal year-end meeting every year to make sure that for the entire school year, you're reporting, if any, what was considered long-term illness, how many days were long-term illness. And then you have a part-time benefits flag. I don't know if your district uses that. Some districts do, some districts don't. But what this flag is allowing you the ability to accumulate sick leave at a different rate than the 1.25 sick days per month for part-time employees. And that's allowable by a House bill. I think it's like House Bill 153. And we'll talk about that a little later on Ben's screen too, but I don't know if your district does that. But if you accumulate sick leave differently for part-time employees, different than giving them 1.25 sick days per month, like all of your full-time employees, then you would indicate yes here. If not, you can leave that blank. Then you can see I'm on screen 1 of 2 down here at the bottom. So I'm going to page down, and screen 2 of BioScreen has a place where you enter a termination date when this employee is completely done with you. And that can be done manually or through a mass update, a mass stop program that enters a lot of stop dates on the employee. Oh, and then you also have the evaluation fields, which your district may or may not use. You have legal name fields, which you can see here on Richard Gere, we have left them blank. If the employee's legal name is what you entered on the first screen, then you do not have to enter anything here. But if you entered a different name on the first screen, what they would like to go by or be called, and it does not match their social security card, then you would have to enter their legal name here so that their W-2 reporting is accurate. But I assume on most of your employees, these fields are blank because you probably, most people enter the legal name on the first screen and don't really give many employees an option to have a different name in payroll. But you may have a few that have a legal name back here. Then you have user-defined fields, which your district may or may not use, and you can use those to track amounts, dates, codes, text, anything. The only one that is really used by a specific program in the software is the date to field if your district uses the census report. And if you use the census report, that date to field is used to track the rehired date for the census program. The rest are completely district defined and you may or may not use them. So there's not much on screen 2. So if I page back up, any other questions about BioScreen when you're setting up a new employee or updating their address or name change? So if I F8, I'm going to exit back to the USP screen menu, and we'll just go into option number 3, which is your DEM screen. So this is for the demographical data on the employee. So a lot of the information here pulls over from BioScreen. So you see the name and address, they're not even in fields that are modifiable. My birth date pulled over from the BioScreen. The hire date, last evaluation, long-term illness, a bunch of these fields, the user-defined fields, they're all pulling in from BioScreen. So the DEM screen and BioScreen are kind of like a shared screen, but there are a few fields here that are not on BioScreen, and they are important for EMIS reporting. So you have the Hispanic Latino field and the race fields. You also have the semester hours, education level, and early childhood education qualification field. You have all of these experience fields, total and authorized or required for EMIS reporting, as is principal years on a principal or an assistant principal. You have a lot of other length of experience fields that your district may or may not use. They're optional. But on the slide 16 of the PowerPoint, I think it was slide 16 that I shared with you guys, the ones that are circled are the ones that are required for EMIS reporting that are different from BioScreen. So you have to come here to fill those out. You can't, everything else you can get to from BioScreen or is district defined optional. So you may be tracking other things, but it's not required for reporting. And Mary will talk about the length of experience years at the times that you need to update those. But total is all years in education plus up to 5 years in the military. Authorized is years of experience in grades pre-K through 12 plus up to 5 in the military. So total could include like college. And then principal years are just those years of experience as a principal or an assistant principal. So nothing can be greater than total. They could all be the same if somebody has been a principal in grades pre-K 12 for all of their education career, or they could all be different like I have here on the screen. And some people won't have any principal years, but you have to enter that on your principal and assistant principals.
Hey, Carrie, is there a program that runs at some point of closing out the fiscal year that updates that?
There is, it's mass increment on the mass change menu.
Okay.
So that'll be on one of your checklists from us, a step for you to do.
Okay.
And it's done actually like right after you close the fiscal year.
That's
So
not like
after I've worked a full year, then I get credit for that year at the start of the next year. So, yep, good question. So you don't have to do this manually. Except when you're hiring them, you want to put in the information that you know for them to have a starting point. So that's DEM screen. It's pretty simple, especially since a lot of the information pulls in from BioScreen. If we F8 to exit and go back into the next option, Ben screen number 4. This is where the employees' benefit balances are visible to you and where you can maintain their accumulation information. So how much sick leave are they accumulating per month? Are they accumulating personal leave per month or vacation per month? Or is that information being reset? You know, personal leave often is reset once a year. The vacation might be accumulated per year instead of per month. You can enter maximums here. So you would come here to either look at an employee's benefit balances, how much leave they have available, or to update their accumulator if it's changing. So if their vacation, if they're moving from like 10 years of experience to 11 years of experience and your district says at that point they start accruing more vacation time, you might increase an accumulation or you might increase a maximum. You also might use the advanced used fields. Those are for tracking any sick leave days that you have advanced to an employee, and districts interpret that sick leave advance requirement differently. So some people advance sick leave once only for their entire time with you, and some advance it once a year, and some advance it ongoing as long as they're not using more than 5 at a time. But if you're advancing sick leave, these fields are available for you to track them in the system.
Okay, so I have a question about that. We've only done an advance one time, but it seems to be becoming more popular because we have people who are hired and then all of a sudden they're out on FMLA for some reason and don't have any sick days. So we may advance them to 5 days. If I put a 5-day advance in there, does that mean the accumulator wouldn't give them any days until it's caught up, or is that on me?
No, the accumulator would keep giving them days, but it would decrease the negative instead of like building a balance. So like if you put an advanced max of 5 and then it would track that they're negative and it would track how many they used, and the accumulator would like bring them out of the negative, if that makes sense.
Right. So they wouldn't end up getting an extra 5 days, it would still only allow them to get the 15 for the year.
Right.
Okay.
They would not accumulate anymore. And then there's a setting in USPS DAT where you can enter if you want to give them advanced leave once only or ongoing, depending on how your district interprets it. So if it's once only, once they hit this max, they'd be done.
All right. Good to know. Thank you.
Uh-huh. And then on this sample database, you see deferred. I don't think you guys defer your absences, so you may not see this field. This is if when you post absences to attendance screen, the balance is not updated immediately. The balance is not updated until you process payroll. So some districts have deferred absences for just that time period in between posting attendance and running a payroll. And then their balance is updated, and this deferred, whatever's sitting out here, is taken away from the balance when they run a payroll. But I don't think you guys do deferred posting. If you do not,
We did that way back when Marlene was here, and that is a nightmare. We will never do that again.
so if you don't do deferred, you won't see this at all. And when you post an absence to attendance screen, the person's balance is updated instantly. So over on the right, you see eligibility fields, and those cannot be maintained here. They're actually maintained on the job screen, which we will look at next. But this just gives you a quick glance of which of these different leave types they are actually eligible for. If you needed to change that, you would have to go to another screen to change that. At the bottom of the screen, I've not really mentioned, but if you needed to modify information on any of these screens, then the F14 is your option, so Shift F4. And when you hit modify, you see some fields that kind of become available to edit. You can see the one fields are not editable, but so you have a handful of fields on this screen that you could modify if you needed to. And then you would enter to save your changes, or you would F9 to cancel. So I'm going to F9 to cancel. You also see down there at the bottom that there's a tip that F7 is your help key, which we could see that I did F9 to cancel. So I'm back to my normal options at the bottom. And that's down here as well. So even if I'm not in modify mode, then I can use my arrow key to go put my cursor on a field. If I were in modify mode, I would have to use my tab key to go through the fields. But I can hit F7 on a field, and it's going to give me some helpful information near the bottom of my screen. So like this benefit unit, our benefits accumulated on an hourly or daily basis. So you enter either an H or a D in that field. So if you're looking at a field and you don't know what it's for, you can always try your F7 key with your cursor on that field to get a little bit more information. So this person is set up with daily leave. You could also have some people set up with hourly leave. If your district does that part-time accrual of sick leave for part-time people that I mentioned on the bottom of bio screen, then you would also see another field down here for that program where it would say how much the individual is going to accumulate hourly and how many hours they have worked so far, because they're going to accumulate that hourly leave as they hit every 80 hours of work. So you would see a different accumulation field down here and an hours tracking field down here if your district does that. And if you have, you would only see that field on an employee that you marked yes, part-time benefit on bio screen. And if you do that, then in the payroll process, you normally run a benefit accumulation program called BENAC to accumulate sick leave. Like Brenda was asking about the 1.25 days and how they would accumulate that. She's doing that through a program that accumulates it on everybody once a month. But if you do the part-time, it's not handled through BENAC. It is instead handled through mass sick on the mass change menu. So Brenda, do you know if you guys do the mass change, mass sick program for anybody, or if you just give everybody 1.25 sick days across the board?
Yeah, they just get all the 1.25 across the board.
Okay, so you guys won't see those different fields. So if I exit benefit screen and go into the next option, job screen, this is where you're going to see all of the contract information for your employee. So you see there, first you see that I'm on job 1. So I'm on the first job for this employee and they could have more than one. So then you see the job title for this job, the check stub description, the position code, which comes from the EMIS manual to identify for reporting purposes what position this individual is working in. Then a position type, which is used for SERS reporting to indicate regular, supplemental, or temporary. This also might be used for EMIS reporting. Then there's a type of an appointment. So 1 for certified, 2 for classified. There's also an EMIS type of an appointment. And for 99% of your staff, those are going to be the same. If you indicate 1 for certified in the type of appointment, they're going to be 1 for certified in the EMIS type of appointment. The only difference is on the treasurer, because they are paying into SERS, and so the system sees them as classified, an appointment type of 2, but EMIS sees them as certified, an appointment type of 1. So you will see like a mismatch on a treasurer, but everybody else, if you put 1 for certified, you're putting 1 for EMIS certified, or 2 for classified, 2 for EMIS classified. The contract type is district defined, so you may or may not use that. Then you have the report to EMIS flag that I mentioned to indicate which jobs are EMIS reportable if this employee is EMIS reportable. You have a low grade and a high grade, which is required on principals, assistant principals, intervention specialists, and maybe paraprofessionals. You have to report what grades they're serving and a separation reason and a separation date if this employee has left, resigned, retired, or been terminated. A building IRN to track which building they're in, and that's reportable to EMIS. Then some district defined fields for building and department, which are helpful when running reports or sorting information. Position start date, so the very first time that this person started this specific position. Contract start date, which gets updated every year to indicate when their new contract started. Contract stop date or terminated date if they've left this position. Last raise date, if you track that in the system, it's optional. Retirement code, which is a 450 for STRS, a 400 for SERS, or blank for a job that is not subject to retirement. So like a severance payout that is not subject to retirement, you would leave that blank. Or insurance opt-out. If you build a job for insurance opt-out or vacation payout, you could leave that blank so that it does not withhold retirement on this job. Job status of 1 for active, 0 for inactive. So your contracted people who get paid every pay, they are going to be active. You're going to see a 1. For your subs, you're going to see a 0 because you only pay them based on timesheet information, which you guys import from Timeware and ASOP and possibly Kiosk. Then you have the pay plan information over to the right. So is your district paying semi-monthly or bi-weekly? And you guys are semi-monthly. Then you have a pay group, which is district defined, and there's a separate area in the software where you go to define a list of available pay groups. And once you have that list defined, you can use your F7 key to see what your pay groups are. And that is a way that you group like employees. So their contracts are starting at the same time of the year. They're working similar calendar days. You're going to start paying them at the same time of the year. It's helpful when running payroll so that you can determine that date range you need to pay them for and when you need to activate their new contracts. Then there's a calendar type. So when we were looking at the pay stub, we saw that Richard Gere had 11 workdays during the payroll that we looked at that pay stub for. And that was pulled from the calendar here, this LAC calendar. So you could see this as blank on some of your employees. If you see a blank, they're still tied to a calendar because by default, every pay group is tied to a calendar. Or you may see calendars on everybody's screen. That's just a district preference. But if you don't see a calendar here, you'd have to go to that list where the pay groups are maintained in the USPS stat menu to see what calendar this employee is on. Then you could go look for the work days that are on that calendar. If you see, like in this instance, a calendar type and a pay group, if this pay group is tied to a different calendar, the calendar that's entered on job screen takes precedence. So this employee is looking at this LAC calendar, not a calendar that's tied to this pay group by default if that's different. And subs, even though they aren't contracted for days, you don't know when they're going to work with you, they're still tied to a calendar. They're just tied to the default calendar, which has 0 work days on it. Then you have the calendar start date. So the very first time this person was on this calendar, so that does not change every year. Then the calendar stop date to track the last day they worked on this calendar, which we talked about that a little bit this morning before we started this class on those people who are resigning or retiring, entering a calendar stop date to make sure they stop getting credit for any days after the stop date. So the stop date is the last day of work, and that work day is included when running a payroll. Then there is a job type, which is available for supplementals, and it would identify how you want to tax a supplemental job. So there is an option of supplemental 1 or supplemental 2. Sorry, I said supplemental 2, I meant supplemental 3. There's 2 options, supplemental 1 or supplemental 3. So supplemental 1 would pay a supplemental job with any annuity amounts being applied to regular wages, the annuity amounts not being applied to the supplemental wages, and then looking at the federal tax that the employee owes. Whereas supplemental 3 would apply annuity amounts to the supplemental job and then tax them accordingly on a lesser taxable gross on that supplemental pay. So you can set that up here on the job, or there's another option that we will see once we get into looking at the screens for entering pay up to Cal Current and up to Cal Future, where you can indicate the taxing option there as well. And if I F10 to go to my next job for Richard Gere, his coaching job, you do see that I have the supplemental 1 for him chosen, but that choice is up to your district, how you want to tax jobs.
I don't think we changed that. I think that's blank on all the ones we
on
have.
your jobs.
I'll be honest, I didn't even know that was an option.
That would kind of like hard code it, and all your supplementals would be one way. If not, I mean, if you're doing it as you're entering the pay, that's fine too. It's kind of either or. You can do it either place.
Well, I don't. Okay.
So like in up to Cal Future, if you're keying there, when you do like 2YY, 3YY, 1YY, that 1, 2, or 3, that's the same thing.
Okay, because
Only in future, you also have an option of a 2.
because I'm just gonna say I believe it's always a 2. Is that
Okay.
wrong?
And I would say consistency is key. So whatever your district has decided, I would just continue doing that.
I don't think in all the years I've ever used anything besides a 2, so that's why I was like, are we doing that wrong? We've
Okay.
had so many people in this position. Maybe other people are not doing that way, but I'm just.
And I think the 2, like here I talked about, there's an option to apply annuities either to the regular wages or to the supplemental wages. Option 2, once you get into the future or current, is saying just tax my supplementals as regular wages. It's not on the supplemental taxing table.
Okay.
So I think that's the option then that you're
We
picking.
suspend like all of when we do the mini pays, we suspend all the extra deductions that they have so they don't come out of that check. So if it would be a teacher who's getting a coaching position but also puts into a 403B, it doesn't come out of that coaching check. We suspend all that stuff. So it just takes out like the retirement and the Medicare and the normal taxes.
So I think then by using the 2, it's just looking at regular tax tables, not that supplemental where it's supposed to start with like 20% or something. But
Okay. As long as
but
I
that
get
yeah, I would say just whatever your district does, I would stick with it unless you have a reason to decide to change.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
And then the information below that, you have the assignment area, which is required on some positions. So like on the Principal 108, it is required. So this is something that you could look up in the EMIS manual, or you have that F7 help key to give you the different assignment areas. If you're building a new employee and you know they're replacing a different employee, a lot of times it's easy to look up that other employee and see what they were doing. But if you leave this blank and it's required on the certain position that you're reporting, then your EMIS coordinator is going to tell you, hey, I have an error on this teacher or this paraprofessional or this principal because you don't have an assignment area and you need to enter that. And that's not a big deal. You enter it then.
Yeah, like I was telling you yesterday, Courtney, some of these EMIS fields, Glenna and I will kind of take the lead on that. So if you would miss one of those, we are going to run a report at the beginning of the school year, actually before the school year starts, and we're going to double check all that stuff. But when you're mimicking, like I said yesterday, if you pull up a person that's replacing someone and you pull up their screen, you would be able to put that assignment area in there because they're replacing someone that left, and that would be okay. But if you would mess those up, Glenn and I right now are checking those. So again, that's just a little bit different. I know some of the other payroll people do that on their own with no outside looking at that. But Glenna likes to do those because she has certain places she wants things to go, and her and Susan work out those details. So.
Okay.
Thank you, Brenda. That's good to know. That's a good double check. And the next field, code and percent. So this is identifying what fund you are paying the individual out of. So we talked about the pay account a little bit when we talked about account structure, and we're going to see the pay screen here in a minute. But in addition to entering a pay account, for EMIS reporting purposes, you have to identify what fund you're paying the individual out of. So if I hit F7, you'll see that there's a big long list. So is it state funds, state auxiliary funds, other state funds, federal funds, and you can use your Control F8 key to continue looking at this list. When you're done looking at this list, you hit F8 to exit. But so in this case, this individual is being paid 100% out of local funds. You might have somebody who's split 50-50, 60-40, but if Glenna is coming and telling you to change somebody's pay account for some reason, this may need to be updated as well. I don't know if Brenda and Glenna are checking that for you too.
Yes, we're
Okay.
checking anything that's in that assignment line there. So that code, that percentage, we're looking at all of that. And I know Carrie will be getting into this probably too, but the EMIS, if someone's being split, there's going to be another field she's going to show you. And we also check that field, Carrie. You know, the EMIS one where you're putting in
Uh-huh.
that.
Okay.
Also, I ran, when we do our new contracts, I run a massive spreadsheet that pulls these fields in as well as their current contracts and their current step and column. And then I use that spreadsheet for these type of updates as well, so that we don't miss anybody who was split last year, but maybe is not going to be split this next school year. Because I found that's easily missed because you don't always see those unless you do that next screen on the jobs. So anyways, we can, when you get to that part, I'll probably have a couple comments on that as well. But yes, we do check this field as well.
Okay, good. And one thing I guess that might be helpful, and maybe this is similar to what you already described that you're doing, but on the payroll documentation page, we have this Safari step-by-step document that helps you kind of verify building IRN versus pay account versus that local fund code. It tells you all these different fields to pull out to make sure they're all in sync, like at the beginning of the school year after people have moved around. So as you're verifying, maybe you're already using this or doing basically the same thing, but this document might help with that verification step too.
Yeah, I think I pulled this out. This is similar to the one that I pulled last year. I started doing that last year. And I believe this is the one that I use. And I actually add a couple other columns that
Fields to
I like.
verify.
Yeah, but this was definitely good because it did give us the information that we were looking for. So yeah.
Okay, good. So the last thing over here on the first screen of job screen is the benefit eligibility flags. So we saw on Ben's screen if somebody was eligible for sick, vacation, or personal leave, but this is where it's maintained. So this principal is eligible for all three. Then to see the next screen, we page down. And this is more of the pay related information for the employee on job screen, screen 2. You see the obligation first, which is the amount that you're going to pay this individual for this contract. Then you see the amount. And in this example on the screen, it's the same. The amount matches the obligation. That's going to be true at the beginning of the year, but it's not necessarily true throughout the entire year. If you do a mid-year contract adjustment on somebody and it's not retroactive to the beginning of the contract, so for part of the year they worked at one hourly rate or daily rate or one number of hours a day, and then for the rest of the year they're working a different amount or at a different rate, the obligation would be the blended amount of that money that you're truly going to pay the person, and the amount is that contract amount, that new salary schedule step that they're at for that second half of the year. So these could be the same or you might see them different, but the obligation line is the one that you are truly going to pay the person by running payroll. Then the amount paid is updated as you run payrolls automatically by the system, as is the amount due, amount earned, and amount docked. So the amount earned, we saw when we looked at that paycheck that Richard Gere had worked 11 days at $500 a day and earned $5,500. So the system put that here. We paid him $5,000 for this job, and the difference is $500. So if you were to pay off this contract right now, the amount due would be $500. So the system is tracking that for you. So for teachers, that amount due is going to grow throughout the year, and then it will be used over the summer to pay their summer pays. Once in a while, the amount due is negative. So in that instance, you really have to watch somebody's contract if they're coming into a situation where they're quitting or resigning. But if you see negative, you can always call and talk to us about that. But that would, in essence, mean based on their even pay per period, you have paid them more than they have physically earned. So it could happen once in a while throughout the year that to keep their pays even, you have overpaid them in a way as of that point in time. But if they continue working, it will all even up at the end of the contract. Then you have the extended service field, which is only used by ESCs, so you'll never see anything in that field. Then you have the number of pays. So this contract year is going to be paid over 24 pays in this example. And this contract year has only had one pay paid. So the number of pays is something that you enter. The pays paid is updated by the system. Likewise, you enter the number of work days that this contract is for, and the system updates the number of days that have been worked, that have been processed in a payroll to date. Then you have equal pays, yes or no. So your people who are on a contract, who are on stretch pay, who are getting that same even amount every payroll, this flag, the yes, is what is controlling that. And the no, you would typically see on like your subs or anybody who's turning in a timesheet, or you're just paying based on what they've worked or earned. You're not stretching their pay evenly. Hours per day and retire hours is important for EMIS and retirement reporting. So those, you need to make sure those are up to date every year. Then the pay unit is either daily, which is a 2, or hourly, which is a 1. The pay per period is calculated by the system. So it's that obligation divided by the number of pays equals the pay per period. The daily rate, you can input that. The system also tries to double check you and calculate that as well. And then the doc next pay and retro next pay, those are used if you're doing a mid-year contract adjustment, and the system would update those automatically based on that mid-year contract adjustment on the very next page. You need to dock a little or give them a little to catch them up. So then you have this special ed FTE, and then an FTE field under salary schedule, and an FTE field under the EMIS fields. So if this person is working with special ed students, you have to report the amount of their day that is with those special ed students. So the FTE is a full-time equivalent. So if this principal were working fully special ed, then he was doing full-time special ed, then this would be a 1 for 1 special ed FTE. I don't have anything in special ed FTE, but I do have a 1 in regular FTE. So this person is considered full-time based on the longest working principal, so 8 hours a day. If you have a bus driver, for example, and the longest per day that a bus driver works is 7 hours, then that position of bus driver, the FTE would be 1 for the 7 hour a day. And then anybody who works less than that would be divided by the 7. So FTE is based on that position and the longest number of hours per day that anybody is working in that position. And then you're comparing the individual you're looking at to that longest hours per day to say if they are a full-time person or not in the eyes of EMIS reporting. So you have a field for regular FTE and then another one that's under EMIS. So if you are needing to report to EMIS differently than this 1 FTE, like Brenda was explaining that some people are paid on 1 job, but for EMIS purposes, you have to report 2 jobs. So for instance, a music teacher who is split between two buildings, you might pay their full salary on one job, but EMIS needs to see that they're working part of a day or part of their work days at a different building. So EMIS would have to see a different hours per day or a different number of work days in a partial contract amount for just that partial FTE at one building. Remember, we had the building hire in on the first screen of this job screen. So you'd have to build a whole nother job screen for that other partial job for EMIS purposes, even if you didn't want to pay on it. So the EMIS fields can be used, or in this example, I have left them blank because I'm saying that the hours per day that I've listed over here, the contract amount that I've listed over here, the work days that are appearing over here, and the FTE that's down here are accurate for EMIS purposes. So I didn't need to update this information to report anything differently, but you might see those fields filled out on some individuals in your database if EMIS needs to see something different than what you're truly maintaining on the job screen for pay purposes. And the common example is split between two buildings.
Yes, and these are the fields that I was talking about, Courtney, that we'll run a report on, and we can update those off of that report because we may have, like Carrie said, a music teacher that's at the Hebron building this year and at the JIS, but then for next school year, they're going to be at the JIS in the middle school. So then we have to go in and modify, and their percent may be different. Maybe they were 50-50, but this next year they're going to be 75-25. So we found it easier to just run a report that pulls everybody that has anything in that field currently and then modify it that way, because it does get a little bit messy when we start moving people around. And unfortunately, that's just part of the beast at the beginning of the year. Teachers move around, move buildings, move from one subject to a different subject. So it's just easier to run that, and you can visually see it on one piece of paper instead of flipping through every single individual that we have. So.
And oftentimes, like Brenda said, that's forgotten. So I'm glad you guys have a process to check that every year, because a lot of times you as payroll, you're worried about this information on the left side of the screen. Are you paying them correctly? Not necessarily worried about, are you reporting them to EMIS correctly? And if you're paying them on one job and you have that second job out there for EMIS reporting purposes, you might remember to update the job that you're paying on, even the EMIS information, but you might forget about that other job. So I'm glad you guys have a process in place to try to catch those possible mistakes to get your EMIS reporting accurate.
Try.
Then at the bottom, you have that salary schedule information, which is optional. You may use that to track the information in your software, or you may track that elsewhere, like in a spreadsheet. So you can use that information if your district would like. Then there's a screen 3 of job screens, so I'm going to page down. And this information is updated. The majority of this information is updated automatically by the system, other than the user-defined fields that are available at the bottom. I don't know if you guys use any of the user-defined fields on this screen. Once in a while, I see people using the text field if there's a job set up for a really unusual reason, or some payoff was done differently, or somebody paid you back because you overpaid them. Somebody might put text in here just to track something in the system.
Never used that as far as I know.
Okay. But most people never come to screen 3 of job screen. You normally only worry about screen 1 and screen 2. But the dollar amounts are updated by the system. So if you are researching something, you might come here to look to see what has happened on this job calendar year to date, quarter to date, fiscal year to date, or contract year to date. So you will very rarely make any changes to these unless you're following like a document from LACA or working with us on a problem. Like if something wasn't processed through the payroll and you need to hurry up and reflect it on the W-2, like life insurance payments or something, then we might have you make changes here. But typically if you come here, it's just to look. So if I exit out of job screen, position screen is number 6, and how the bio screen and dem screen work together. The position screen and the job screen work together on some information. So like the salary schedule information and the FTE pulled in, the building IRN, a bunch of this information is pulling in from job screen, but there are a few fields here that are only on position screen. So the status is something that's important for EMIS reporting. It identifies the employee's current employment relationship with the district. So in this example on the screen, you see a status of a C, meaning this is an active continuing employee with the district. You might see an A for a contracted agency, or I for a contracted individual, P for leave of absence if somebody's on board approved leave of absence for the year, or a U for no longer employed in the position. So that's important for EMIS reporting. And the qualified paraprofessional field and the HQPD field, those fields are on the screen, but they are not on job screen, and those are for EMIS reporting as well. I think the rest of the fields were all available on job screen. So if you're coming here, it's probably just to update one of these 3 fields. And then looking at screen 2, if I page down, it just has user-defined information. So unless your district tracks something, I really doubt you will ever look at this screen. And are we doing okay if I keep going, or does anybody need a break?
I'm fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, while we're taking a break here for one little second, if you guys are asking me a question or something and I don't respond, I've probably had to go out and let somebody in the building because it seems to be a open door today. And my phone is ringing off the hook with verification of employment. So
Okay.
if I don't respond, I am here and listening. It's probably because I've got every device in my office is ringing.
Okay, so the next option on this menu is pay screen, so number 7. And this is where you're going to see that pay account. So we talked about the account code structure this morning. So that account should look a little familiar to you now. And every job, so this pay screen is specifically tied to job 1, the principal job. And I would have a different screen tied to the coaching job, like if I hit F10 for next. So looking at the bottom, I see F10 would take me to the next. Then I see my job 2 pay account for the coaching position. If I hit F11, it's going to take me back to Richard Gere's job 1 pay account. But what I see here, in addition to which job this pay account is tied to, I see if this is the first pay account tied to this job. There could be more than one if somebody's split like 50-50. I also see this pay account, like a description pulls in for me, so I have an idea kind of what this pay account means, pulling in from your account information if the numbers don't make sense to you yet. But I also see how much of this job's pay is being charged out to this account. So you can charge based on a percent or a fixed amount. And if you are charging based on a fixed amount, so every pay I want $5,000 to go to this grant account. Even if that $5,000 covers the entire paper period for this job, you still have to have a percent equals 100 or multiple percentages that add up to 100, just so that the system knows what to do if you go over that fixed amount. So the common thing you're probably going to see is percent 100, maybe 2 different accounts, percent with a partial amount. Once in a while, you might see a fixed amount that you're charging a certain portion of somebody's salary to, like a grant. But you have the option to see a start date and a stop date for this account. So as somebody is paid year after year, you're going to start seeing old accounts sitting out here, especially if they're out of grant money. You might see prior year grant monies with stop dates on them. You have the account status, so this is telling me this one is active. So if you're paging through a bunch of accounts on the same job, make sure you're looking at the active pay account to know which one's going to be charged. And you see how much pay this year has been charged to this pay account and how much pay this fiscal year has been charged to this pay account. And then a maximum amount, which if we were using a fixed pay account, and I can pull up one of those as an example, then you would enter a maximum to be charged. And then that status would be maximum amount in effect instead of active. But you also see the board disc flag and the leave projection flag. So you guys don't use Leave Pro, so this one isn't going to be as important. But this is where that information was pulling from on Richard Gere's pay stub. That when that payroll was run, his board disc flag on this pay account was yes, and his Leave Pro flag was yes on this pay account. And on his second job, if I have 10 to that next one, they were no. So this is where it was pulling from. So if that was incorrect, you would come and change it here. So again, what this is saying is when I charge the board disc flag is saying when I charge the board share of benefits using the board disc program, yes, I want to base my account that I'm going to charge on this pay account. And then on that, if I change to the coaching job account, this one is saying no. When I charge board share of insurance, for example, using the board disc program, I don't want to base it on this coaching account. So I think we have a fixed account, maximum account example on Rachel Green. So she has an account here on like a grant account. So it's a different cash account, a fixed amount of $150 per pay, set up with a maximum. And the one piece of information about maximum fields in reflections in USPS in this database, we'll see them here and we'll also see them on the deduction screen. They are considered declining balance fields. So as you run payrolls, this maximum to charge field is going to decrease until it reaches 0. And that's when the system stops charging on this account. So far, $1,800 has been charged this year and this fiscal year on this account. So this maximum to charge must have started at $5,300. And right now it's down to $3,500. And then $150 getting charged every pay is going to slowly decrease this maximum to charge field until it reaches 0. But I doubt you have a ton of accounts set up like that. But if you come across that, that's a little information about that. And again, your F7 key would be helpful on all of those fields to help explain some of that if you're not as familiar with it.
Now, Carrie, on these accounts, am I correct in saying that we always have to change the grants out every year? So like the 572 grant and then the cost center obviously changes every single year. We should not be changing the cost center on an active one. We should be creating a new one and inactivating the old.
Correct.
Okay.
I would do that just to preserve history because like how it's tracking the dollar amount charged to date, instead of modifying an account, I would just inactivate it and then add the new year's grant account.
Is the redesign going to be different? Like, are we still going to have 50 million accounts out there that we don't even need to see? I know
I believe so. Actually, the pay screen, I haven't looked at that one recently in the redesign, but in all the other screens, yes, all of your inactive accounts are still out there. So I think it's probably the same in pay screen.
Okay.
They are doing in most of those screens, though. I don't know that it's in pay screen, but they're doing like a little checkbox at the top called archived. So similar to the conceal flag with employee, but in
Oh.
a lot of the screens, you can mark something archived so it's like out of your view.
Oh, good, because that's
So that
so annoying.
so that is a little more useful in most of their screens, but I don't know if that's in the pay screen or not.
Yeah, because I mean, if you have somebody that's paid in that grant for the last 15 years, you have a lot of accounts to go through.
And
Get to them.
there is a program that lets you like delete pay accounts that don't have current year information on them. But
Oh,
since you're going to the redesign,
probably don't need to worry about it.
since that information is kind of in your live database, like when we import it all, they just get added right back
Okay.
in
All
the
right.
redesign. So it's kind of pointless at
Yeah.
this point.
All right.
So good question. Yes, good comment about inactivating old ones and adding new ones instead of modifying current ones. So the modify would be like to flip a flag if you have that set up wrong, or, you know, put in a stop date if you're done with it, or if you set this up and picked the wrong account and you hadn't ran a payroll yet and you wanted to hurry up and correct it, you might modify. But if you've already paid on this account this year, it's best to stop it, change the status, and then add the new one for the going forward. So that's pay screen. If we exit this screen and look at the deduction screen, number 8. So you can see that this jumped me to deduction code number 3, which we had looked at the New York City tax on the default employees, so I think that's why it did it. But I'm going to space that out and hit F11 to take me back to the start of Richard Gere's deductions. So this is where you maintain all of that withholding information for an employee, everything tax related, annuities, union dues, insurance premiums, direct deposit information. All of that information is maintained in deduction screen. So you will add this information on a new employee, and then you'll come here regularly as they change contribution or withholding amounts, as they switch deductions, stop deductions, start new ones. So the first one that we're looking at is an example of a federal tax screen. So it tells you at the top what type of deduction this is. So as we page through these, you'll see different types, and different types have different fields available on the screens. So for the federal tax, you're going to see a calculate option of F on the majority of your staff, which is meaning that you want to look at the federal tax tables to calculate federal tax. You might see percentage of gross or cumulative wage method. I don't think very many of our districts use cumulative wage method, but you might see percentage of gross on a few employees if they've elected to have taxes withheld differently on their W-4. Then if you do percentage of gross, you would enter a tax percent. Otherwise, you don't need that tax percent field. You would enter an additional withholding if the employee entered on their W-4 that they would like an additional amount withheld per pay. There's an error adjustment field, which we'll see error adjustment fields on a lot of these deductions. I doubt you're going to commonly use it on any tax screens, but it's there if it were ever needed. So when you might see it is if somebody has an additional withholding of, say, $100 per pay, and then you pay them some little special pay of like $50, and the additional withholding couldn't be withheld, the system's automatically going to move a missed additional withholding to the error adjustment field to be caught up on the next payroll. But you might manually enter an error adjustment on some deductions to catch people up, like on insurance. On the first pay for a new employee, you might have to withhold some extra insurance because insurance is normally withheld on previous pays for current month coverage, and you weren't paying that employee. But on taxes, I don't think you'll use that field very much, but it's there. Then you have the marital status field and the filing status field side by side. So with the old W-4, you'll see employees set up very similarly to Richard Gere, where there is no filing status. And there's no information down here in these fields to like jobs, dependent, income, and deduction, because the old W-4 required marital status and exemptions. The new W-4 requires filing status. You have to indicate yes to the new W-4 and then answer to like jobs if applicable and enter any amounts if applicable. And by if applicable, I mean, did they input amounts on their new W-4 that you need to input here? Like if you hit F7 on dependent, it's saying if on line 3 they entered a value on the new W-4, then this is the amount you enter here. So you don't have to come up with these amounts if they're doing the new W-4, which everybody will be filling out going forward. It was effective January 1st of this year. You just have to look at that W-4 and fill the information out. Then you still have to input marital status. It's not on the new W-4, but the system requires that field. And the number of exemptions, if you know it, you can enter it, but on a new W-4, the tax calculation is not looking at number of exemptions anymore. It is on the old people who filled out the old W-4 before January 1st and are grandfathered in and can still keep having taxes withheld based on that old W-4. But you probably won't be using this field going forward.
So, Carrie, real quick, on the marital status line, since there's 2 spots there now.
So the first one is for marital status, and the second one is for filing status.
Right. So, I'm having people that are, when they're filling this out, they're a little confused about that. Because they're marking, obviously, 1, if they're married, single, but filing separately, and then there's the 2 if they're married, filing a joint return.
Mm-hmm.
Their question is, you know, in the old version of the W-4, you could mark that you were single, but you're really married just because you were paying the higher tax bracket.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that applies now, correct?
I really don't think they can elect that. I think they
Okay,
just need to indicate
That's what I've
they're
been saying to them, but I just wanted to make sure that, yeah, if you had heard anything different about that. Okay.
I have not heard anything different.
Okay.
I think the new W-4 is the government's attempt to try to get taxes to be withheld more accurately and have less of a refund or less of an amount owed at filing time.
And make us all crazy is what it's doing.
Yeah, so the people who used to do married, I'm married, but I want to file single so I get a big refund. You know, I want to withhold single, I guess I should say, not file. Then I think they're trying to avoid that. I think they're trying to limit refunds and limit amount due with the new form. So those fields, like from here down, and then this first one for the old W-4, those are just straight from the W-4. Then the next field, the pension plan field, that has an option of an A for automatically check the pension plan box on the W-2, or a Y for yes, check the box, or a no for no, do not check the box. So you probably see an A on the majority of your people, and what that is going to do is when you run the W-2 processing program at the end of the calendar year, it's going to go out and look at this employee and see if there was a contribution to retirement, and if so, it's going to check the box on the W-2. If you want to definitely override that and make sure everybody's checked, it can be a yes. Or if you know somebody should not be checked, it can be a no. But my assumption is the majority of your staff are set up with an A to automatically do it. And if no retirement was withheld from the employee during the year, it would not check the box. So we talk about a lot of these next fields at calendar year end during our payroll roundtable right before calendar year end to get ready for W-2s, because like the health reimbursement, employer health, moving expenses, taxable benefits, and then over on the right, fringe benefits, life insurance, adoption assistance, dependent care, third-party pay, and vehicle lease, Those are all fields that are here in case you need to get information on the W-2 that is not automatically there because of something you paid through the system or processed in some way through the system. So we talk about those at calendar year end when you're getting ready to print W-2s. Then at the bottom of the screen, the columns for accumulator, quarter to date, fiscal year to date, and year to date, those are updated automatically by the system as you run payrolls. And the accumulator column, it is populated when you run a payroll and then it's cleared when you pay deductions. So like on this federal tax screen, when you run the program to issue your check for federal taxes or your electronic payment for federal taxes, it's going to clear this money out because it's been paid to that vendor. And so this is like a little pot where it's tracking how much money has been withheld from the payroll and not yet paid to that vendor yet. So that's what the accumulator column is. You normally will not make any changes to these fields unless we're getting ready for calendar year end and you're figuring out something's wrong for the W-2. We might have you make some changes, or the accumulator column, once in a while, we will work with you and you'll have to change it. Like if you get a refund check from a vendor, so something that happens outside of payroll and you have to reflect it in payroll, once in a while you reflect it here. But if you're ever thinking about making changes to these dollar amounts, please reach out to us and talk that through with us too, because this impacts your W-2 reporting on different deductions. It impacts retirement reporting. So we just want to make sure everything's correct. So that's the federal tax deduction screen. If I F10 to go to Richard Gere's next deduction screen, he has an Ohio state tax screen. A lot of these fields are similar to what we just saw on the federal record. So this one is set up to look at the tax tables for the state of Ohio's tax, or if you did percent, you have a percent field. There's the additional withholding if the employee asks for an additional amount to be withheld per pay, an error adjustment field if needed. You see a start and a stop date, which we will see this on a lot of deductions. So if they're starting something or you're entering something that's going to start in the future, you can enter a start date of the pay date that this should start withholding, and a stop date. Likewise, if you need to stop the deduction, can be entered as a future date or as the past date right after you completed the payroll. Then there's a number of exemptions for Ohio that they should be filling out on their Ohio form, and whether or not this employee is reportable to ODJFS. So I believe all of your employees are except students. If you are paying students as a part of their coursework with you, so they're doing some sort of work and getting paid while they're actually taking a class with you, and board members. So the majority of your employees are going to be marked yes, that they're reportable to ODJFS. Then you have those amount fields at the bottom that are updated by the system. And if I F10, here's an example of a city tax. So it tells you at the top, this is a type of municipality tax. And you see a new field here for job number. This is available on city tax records and retirement deductions. If, for instance, you have an employee who is working at 2 buildings and one building is inside city tax limits where there is a city tax, like Hebron, and then at another building they're outside of the city limits, so that other job is not subject to the city tax, then you may use this job number field to control that. Right now, in this example, the job number is blank, so any job that I pay Richard Gere on, the tax is going to be withheld. But you might see job numbers on your city tax deductions. Then there is the additional withholding if the employee filled that out, error adjustment if needed, percent of gross. You might see that on City taxes, it's another way to track what percent of a person's pay is subject to city taxes. So if you're not using the job number field, you instead could say, this person is 50-50 between two different buildings, one inside city limits and one outside city limits. But I'm paying them all on one job. So I can't use the job number field to split their pay. Instead, I'm going to use this percent of gross and say 50% of my gross should be subject to the city tax. So you can enter a percent there if applicable. You have the start and stop date fields. You also have this field over to the right to indicate if the tax is employment based with a C or residence based with an R. I honestly don't know why that's not an E for employment based, but I always think of C as compensation based. So a C is they're taxed because of where they're earning their compensation. And
I say C because it's crazy.
okay. So the R would be residence based if you're doing a courtesy withholding based on where they live, where they reside. Then there's user defined fields if you use those, and the dollar amount fields at the bottom of the screen that are updated by the system. If I F10, the next deduction that we have set up for Richard Gere is the board share of retirement. You see that job field, so this could be tied to a specific job if needed. And the percentage field is actually if you were doing an employee share of retirement on this deduction, but we have the employee share on a separate deduction. And the board share is a percentage, the percent that the board is responsible for retirement. Then there's error adjustment fields for the employee share and the board share if needed. And again, the employee share is, we'll see that on a later deduction on a separate deduction now. Then there's start date, stop date, also a rehired date, which is important if you are rehiring a retiree because that gets reported to the STRS or SERS system. So you indicate the date that the retiree was re-employed with you. You also have a field down here for new employee to indicate if this is a new employee, yes, and they are reportable to STRS as a new hire, or no, they are not a new employee, so they're not reportable. Then you have over on the right a full-time or part-time flag, which is important to have accurate for service credit calculation purposes. At the fiscal year-end meeting, we will talk about this a little bit more. You will submit a report to STRS every year and indicate what service credit your employees earned. So the system calculates it, but it uses this field to calculate whether they're full-time or part-time, and it does the calculation differently based on this flag. So that's important to have correct. So you would probably have part-time on all your subs, full-time on your contracted employees if they're working at least 120 days, if they're contracted with you at least 120 days a year. So your typical contracted employees are going to be full-time and your subs are typically going to be part-time. Then you have a retiree flag, which impacts whether or not they get service credit because people who have already retired from the retirement board do not continue to earn service credit towards retirement. So you have to indicate that, yes, they are a re-employed retiree if that applies. The surcharge exempt flag we see on both the STRS deduction and the SERS deduction, but it really is only applicable to SERS. There's a surcharge that SERS does every year, and we talk about that at the fiscal year end meetings. So a lot of these things you'll hear again coming up very soon. And the fringe benefit extra compensation flag, you can enter yes or no. Should this board share of retirement be considered a fringe benefit? So would the retirement system look at this as compensation, and it inflates their retirement so it looks like you're paying the person more than you are, so they're earning more towards retirement credit. So the majority of your staff are probably a no, but you might see that on some of your administrators if that's in their contract. Then you have the amount fields at the bottom that are updated by the system. So the 450 is the STRS board share of retirement. The 400, if this employee were classified, the 400 is for the board share of SERS retirement, and it looks very much the same. So if I F10, then I see the employee share of STRS, which is a 591, and the employee share of SERS would be a 590. So you see the job field if this needs to be tied to a job. And you do see also that this is an annuity deduction. Even though it's specifically for retirement, STRS, it's also coming out pre-tax. So you have the employee percentage, which on this screen is 12%, but the STRS current percent is 14% for the employees. The SERS current percent is 10% for employee share. This is our sample database is a couple years old, so this is an older percent when STRS was slowly increasing to the 14% that's current. The error adjustment field is there if you need it. Start and stop dates if needed. User defined fields, and then the dollar amount fields at the bottom that are updated by the system. If I F10, next on Richard Gere we see a Medicare deduction. The deduct category is either an M for Medicare or an F for FICA. So at the top you see that this deduction type could be for Medicare or FICA. And then this tells you in this instance we're using it to deduct Medicare. So on this deduction you see the employee share and the employer share on the same deduction. So that's the percent, the 1.45% share for Medicare. Error adjustment for the employee share, and error adjustment line for the board share if needed. And start and stop dates, user defined fields, and the dollar amounts that are updated by the system. So I don't, on Richard Gere, I guess I don't have a regular annuity deduction, but we haven't talked a whole lot about the error adjustment line. But if this were for like health insurance, so if I go find Rachel Green, she probably has something on her. So here's an example of a United Healthcare deduction. It's a type of annuity, so it's coming out pre-tax. It's a fixed amount, so you're saying that you want this fixed amount per pay or per month to come out. You could also do a percentage, but on insurance, the fixed amount's more common. You have the employee share and the board share on the same deduction. The error adjustment fields are where you would possibly catch that employee up on the first pay of their contract if they owe you for insurance that would have previously been collected on an earlier pay for the current month coverage. So if you need to withhold extra money from an employee, you're going to enter a positive dollar amount on the employee line. If you need to withhold extra money from the school board for the employer share, you're going to enter a positive amount on the board error adjustment line. If you need to refund money to an employee, so say they're resigning and you withheld insurance for next month, they're not going to work with you next month anymore, so you need to refund it, you would put negative amounts on these lines, and that will give the money back. And the taxes and everything will be corrected during the payroll. You don't have to worry about that. So another field that you see on an annuity deduction that we didn't talk about on the other deduction screens is pay cycle. If I F7 on that, I see my options for my pay cycle. A 1 would be if you only want this annuity to be withheld on the first pay of the month. A 2 would indicate only on the second pay of the month. So that's not very common for insurance, but maybe somebody has that filled out for like an annuity that they only want to contribute on the second pay of the month because on the first pay of the month they're paying more bills or something. But the 1 and the 2 are probably not extremely common. The 3 is saying that you want this deduction to be withheld on the first and second pay of the month. The 4 is saying every pay of the month, even a third pay of the month. You guys are semi-monthly, so you won't really have third pay of the months. That would be more common for biweekly pay. Then the 5 would be first and last pay of the month. So if you were biweekly and regularly getting that third pay of the month, maybe you want the first and the third instead of the first and the second. But so which pay cycle you select here influences the dollar amount that you enter on that line. So whether this is insurance or some other annuity, if you're picking a 1, 2, or 3, the amount that you enter, if I exit here, the amount that you enter here is the per pay amount. If you're entering a 1, 2, or a 4. So the first pay of the month, you want this specific amount to come out. It's the per pay amount. Second pay, this per pay amount. Fourth, then option 4, every pay of the month, this per pay amount. The 3 and the 5, if you pick those, the amount that you enter here is the monthly amount. So the system is going to divide this pay in half and take $102.02 out on the first pay and $102.02 out on the second pay based on this pay cycle. So once in a while people make a mistake and enter a wrong amount here, which is why it's recommended whenever you make a change to somebody's deduction, you preview their check before you finalize payroll and just make sure it's doing what you want. But if it's taking out twice as much as you expected or half as much as you expected, it's probably because of this pay cycle and the fact that the system is expecting different things than you've input. The annuity deduction screen also has a field that you can choose to manually update to indicate the last day that you modified this field. And it has over on the right some fields related to maximums. So we talked about maximums on pay screen. This maximum deduct amount field is a declining balance field like we saw on pay screen. So if this were, for example, like an HSA account, withholding for an HSA account or withholding for union dues, you might be saying, yes, there should be a maximum that I want to deduct on this deduction this year. And the maximum amount that I want to deduct, you would enter here. As payrolls run, that maximum amount declines until it reaches 0, and then that causes the system to stop withholding this deduction. So if you enter yes here, you have to enter a max deduct amount or it won't withhold anything. And then if you need to enter an annuity account for this individual to appear on a deduction report to send to the vendor, that field's there for you to type in. There's user defined fields and the dollar amount fields at the bottom of the screen. Let's see. Rachel Green might also have a regular deduction that we can talk about, because we didn't talk about one on Richard Gere. So this is a post-tax deduction. So this money's coming out after taxes. An example, YMCA, union dues. You can indicate a fixed amount or a percent. You can have a board share if needed. Error adjustments for the employee and the board share. Start and stop dates. Pay cycle like we saw with the annuity deduction. The max deduct flag and max deduct amount like we saw with the annuity deduction. An account number if needed. User defined fields and amounts that are updated at the bottom automatically. Back to Richard Gere. talked about Medicare. We haven't talked about direct deposit yet. He has one direct deposit record set up. You can set up more than one. The number that you allow is up to your district. Regardless, it's kind of like the pay account. Regardless of how many you set up, you have to have one that reflects 100% or multiple percentages that add up to 100%. Because the other option is fixed amount. So if I wanted to put $100 into a checking account every pay and then the rest of my money into the savings account, then I could do a fixed amount of $100 on the checking account and then a percent of 100% on the savings account, because the system is going to do fixed amounts first and then finish up with percent amounts. So I don't know how many your district allows, but if you allow 2 or 3, you just have to make sure you at least have one that's 100% or a couple that add up to 100%, or you will get an error message when running payroll that you're missing direct deposit information for the employee. You have start and stop dates if needed, and the deposit type indicates whether this is a savings account or checking account. So you have the 22 to indicate a checking account and a 32 to indicate a savings account. I do not know if your district does pre-notes, if Brenda's still on.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so the pre-note option would say, during the first payroll that I'm using this direct deposit information, or during the very first payroll that I'm ever paying this employee, I'm going to select 23 if it's a checking account, 33 if it's a savings account, and then the employee will get a check during that initial pay, and the information will go to your bank to be tested to make sure that you have valid information. And then there's a program that you run that will automatically flip a 23 to a 22 or a 33 to a 32 for the next payroll, so that then going forward, after you've received confirmation from your bank that the account information that you received for this employee was accurate, going forward, they will actually receive a direct deposit to that checking or savings account. So on the right, then you have an institution XREF. I don't know if your district uses that, but what that is an option for you to build a table elsewhere, so that when you're here on this line, you could hit F7 and you could see all of the bank routing numbers with a name that you guys define, arrow up or down and select the routing number. It just eliminates a little bit of a chance for error on that field, but it's optional. So if you don't use that field, you would just hand type your routing number in here from the employee's check or information that they gave you. And then you would input their bank account number. You have user-defined fields. If you would like to use those, we do see a lot of districts with the direct deposit deductions use the text field to track the name of the bank if they're not using the institution XREF, so you may or may not use that. And then you have the amounts at the bottom of the screen that are updated as you run payroll. The last deduction that we have on Richard Gere is his school district income tax. So you can see this is a deduction type of OSDI tax. There's the tax percentage, an additional withholding if the employee filled that out, an error adjustment field if needed, start and stop dates. The number of exemptions pulls in automatically from the number of exemptions that you enter on the Ohio deduction record. And to keep in mind, a point here is that exemptions are permitted on school district income taxes that are traditional. So there are 2 different types of school district income taxes that can be enacted. They can either be traditional tax-based or earned income tax-based. So if it's an earned income school district tax, then the exemption needs to be 0. as you're adding this, if you entered an exemption of say 2 on the Ohio deduction, it's going to fill in a 2 here. And if it's an earned income tax deduction, you would have to know to space that out so that it's not giving them any exemption credit.
Carrie, is there a list of that? Like, I thought we used to have an earned income districts list somewhere, or I guess we can probably Google that, right?
I was going to say, I normally just go, and it could change as districts enact new taxes. I normally go to, and let's see if I can find it.
Because the
So
last one we
here
have
it explains the difference between traditional income tax and earned income tax, but where is the document that? Let's see if it's in this one. I'll probably
there's
click.
yeah, that's where I was going to say. I think that's where it's at. It's on the tax. Yep. Okay.
But this
I
might
can
just
search for
be,
it. Yeah, I'll search for it later. We have a list, but it's old, and I didn't know if that came from you guys or not. So okay.
so this link that I clicked shows a T for traditional or an E for earned.
Right.
So this one. So I think it's hard to remember that. So if you have a list handy on your desk, that would be helpful. If you have it in a file that you can pull out as you're adding these. Or another tip that I've shared before at roundtables is you could, on that default employee record, because the default employee record is going to influence what pulls in here. So if I go to the default,
Oh, we could just type in that little text box.
so if I go to, I think that was like 803. Let's do my mask. So this find is going to find on the default employee my 803 deduction. I'm going to first hit F11. It's going to jump to the lowest deduction code. Then if I hit next, it's going to jump to 803. So this is the one I'm on. So when we do this, when we add a new employee, you'll see this pop in here. I don't know. I think Newark, I could be wrong. But let's say it is an earned income. I think it's traditional, but let's say it's earned income. You could go through on your default employee all of your school district income taxes and write which ones are earned income and say 0 exemptions.
Okay, that's a good idea.
And then when you're adding this to the employee, it's going to be right there. You don't have to look it up.
Right, good idea. Okay.
So that's a tip that I've suggested before. So we'll see that when we add this, when we add a new employee here in a second.
Do we have that same capability for that text box to be in the redesign?
All of the fields carried over, so they're in there.
Okay. All right.
So I believe it should work the same.
Okay.
And the nice thing with the redesign is you can rename that. So instead of it saying text, you could, call it something more appropriate if you wanted. But like you could type earned income and then the text could be yes or no. But okay, so that's a long way of looking at deduction screens. We went through a bunch of different types just so you can get a feel for them. Based on the type of the deduction, you're going to have different fields available. And we'll see these screens again as we add an employee. I kind of like at the end after we go through all of USP screen to add a new employee because it kind of reaffirms a bunch of the stuff that we talked about. So if I exit deduction screen, I'm back at my USP screen menu. And the next option is up to cal current. So this is when you're actually running a payroll, you've initialized the payroll, and people who are currently getting paid would appear in this option. You can go make adjustments there, add more pay, delete somebody's pay if something's wrong, change pay account information, do stuff for that current pay only. If I try to go in there right now, okay, I thought I'd get an error message because I didn't think I had a payroll in process, but I don't have any information in here, so I must have pulled in a payroll like a special pay, and I don't have any employees in here because I have a message at the bottom of my screen saying end of file reached. So I don't have any payroll information in process, so this looks a little funny. I'm gonna F8 out of here, and I'm gonna go into the next option, up to Cal Future, because it looks very much the same, with the exception of Future has the option to add an effective date. So the rest of the columns are all the same, and I do have some information out here in Future. So current is only when you're, for those couple minutes or hours when you're actually in the process of a payroll, you can modify the pay that's actually in that current payroll. Add to it, delete it, modify it. Future, you can work ahead. This is where you typically post your timesheet information, import from Timeware, import from ASOP, import from Kiosk to post pay information for your subs or extra pay information for your employees. That contract information that we saw on job screen, that's going to pull in automatically when you initialize a payroll. This is just like the extra pay. So what you see on this screen, again, up to Cal Future, is very similar to current. The nice thing about working in Future, though, you have a longer time span to work in it. And if you have to reinitialize your payroll because you found you entered your pay date wrong or your date range wrong, Future will continue to pull in. It just sits out there in Future and you don't lose anything. Whereas if you enter a bunch of stuff in current, if you have to reinitialize your payroll, that current payroll is no longer current, so it's gone. So we find that most people work more in Future than current, but you may have to go into current once in a while to make some changes, and that's fine. So in Future, you see records that I have entered out there, or we can add more. So right now I see a regular pay type for one day. This tells me that Hank Aaron's baseball coaching job is set up as daily. So one day at $50 a day, and that is calculating an amount of $50. If he had more lines of pay here, then this gross wages would be higher than that because this is a total of all of these records. There's a field for description that you can type a description in to be helpful for your employee. Here's that tax option field that I was talking about with supplemental pays or miscellaneous pays where you can indicate a 1, a 2, or a 3. We talked about the 1 and the 3 on job screen, and Brenda said that you're typically answering 2 in this field as you're keying in Future. So these relate to that sub 1, sub 3. There was no sub 2, but the 2 option here gives you a third option, which is saying you're taxing this extra pay or supplemental pay as part of regular wages. So that I went down to that field and hit F7 to see that additional information to help me out. The retirement field is a yes/no field for you to indicate if this payment should be subject to retirement. A reg pay type is going to look at his job to answer that, but a miscellaneous pay type would have to be filled in. And then there's a field for retire hours. So if this is subject to retirement, which his job must be saying yes, then you can indicate the number of hours this payment resulted from, and those hours are reportable to STRS or SERS. The effective date field allows you to future date this pay to a future payroll if you wish. If you leave it all zeros, it'll pull into the very next payroll that you run. If you enter a future date here, it is going to pull into that future payroll. So you could potentially key like all of your board member payments or all of your coaching payments ahead of time. And then they're just sitting out there waiting to pull into the appropriate payrolls that they need to pull into. So,
Wait, what? So I could pull it up. That's exciting.
uh-huh.
I can put the supplementals that I have to do in there with, like, say, if I want to do it for this payroll, but it'll be the mini pay. I'm not running it with the regular pay, so that probably won't work.
Yeah, if it's the same,
Yeah, that won't work. Okay.
if you use the same period beginning and ending date, it'll get pulled in whenever your I&I cal dates include this date.
Okay. Yep. Sorry, I got excited.
Okay. But a lot of people do board member payments, or if you had your supplementals in your main payroll, you could key ahead.
Right, and
If your supplementals are always in a mini pay, then you probably can't.
we do the board members in there, so that's how we set them up for the whole year, so that we don't miss them or forget them. So
Okay.
we do utilize that, but I was just like, oh, can I put those other people? Because that would be awesome. All right. Got excited. Sorry.
So if I wanted to add a record here, at the bottom I see F12 is my add option. So if I hit F12, it pops up and says, who do you want to add a record for? Oops, and I hit cancel. So let's F12 again. Gear, and then tab, and I go to accept. I must have been on cancel at one point. So my arrow key left to right moves me back and forth. So if I accept Richard Gear, I'd pick the job that I want to add pay to. And it looks like there is already some pay entered out here in future for him, but maybe I went to enter something else. So I typed miscellaneous because I know that. But if you don't know your pay types, you can hit F7 and see what is available to you. You can use your arrow key to move up and down this list and then enter to select which one you would like. Enter your units and the rate, and we'll just do the same. You worked another tournament. Here's that taxing option that's required for miscellaneous. It was not required for a regular pay type, but this is where you could F7 and decide how you wanted to tax this supplemental pay. Is this payment subject to retirement, yes or no? Are there any retirement hours for this entry? If I wanted to enter this for a future payroll, I could enter my future payroll information here. So maybe I'm still going to process my May 31st pay for a date range of May 16th through May 31st. And I want this one to go in June. So when I run a payroll that includes the date range of June 1st, then it'll pull in. Then you can see it calculated the dollar amount. If I modify this record, another option that I had before I saved or at this point, I can hit F17, which is Shift F7, and I can change those board dis and leave pro flags that were available on the pay account and enter a different pay account if needed. So if I don't enter this information, it's going to pull from the active pay account, the active pay screen tied to the job that I'm entering pay against. But if I know that this coaching position, this tournament should be charged to a different account than the typical pay account that was in pay screen, I can enter that here. Or let's say you're entering time for bus drivers and their extended time that they get paid for if they drive a little extra one day is paid out of one pay account, but if they drive a trip, it's charged to a different account. This is where you could change that account if needed. You can also split it, so you could say, I want $25 charged to one account, $25 charged to another account. And you would just fill in that information if you want it, or just leave pro and whatever the account was, which I don't know all the accounts in this database, but you would just fill that out. I think you can also hit F7 to see. Nope. It's going to say to see a list, so you actually have to know what you want to key against. Okay. So Shift F8, which is the F18 pay account option, shows the pay accounts that are available in his pay screen currently. But if there was a different account, you would need to know that to enter that.
Why did you answer no to the board dis and
I did no to board dis just because my habit is on a coach. I typically think most districts do not charge board share of like insurance
okay?
out to a coaching. If I were
If you say
doing,
yes on there, it doesn't really do anything, right?
if you do yes when you run board dis, you have that question to ignore board dis account flags. So if you say no, don't ignore, then it pays attention to this. If you say yes, ignore, it does not pay attention to
There wouldn't be
this.
anything for it to pull in, right? Because there wouldn't be anything set up on there.
Right? If you put no, it wouldn't pull it in either way. If you put yes, it would pull it in when you pay attention to the flag, or it would not pull it in if you ignore the flag. And really, when you ignore the flag, it pulls everything in based on pay. It basically ignoring says, I don't care how I answered the flag, I want to charge it anyways.
Because I think kind of like the 2 on the other screen, I believe that this has always just been yes, yes.
Okay. So then if you run board dis and pay attention, let me F9 and we'll enter. So we talk about board dis in a later class, Courtney. So if this doesn't make sense, I'm sorry. But so this flag here, Brenda, use only board dis pay accounts, yes or no. So this is saying if you answer yes, then you're only picking up those pay accounts that were marked yes. And if you say no, you're charging everything. But so by saying yes, do you really want that supplemental pay account charged? Some districts say no on like coaching pay so that when they say yes here, it's only charging insurance out to like their main job pay account.
Again, if these people wouldn't have those deduction codes set up because they're obviously not qualified for benefits.
Insurance, yeah,
Right.
then it wouldn't matter, right?
Okay. Okay. But it
So
would
it's-
matter for someone who is a teacher
And a
and is a
coach,
supplement. Okay.
yes.
That's the question. Okay, cool. Thank you. Sorry, Courtney, we just had to have a little side test there.
Brenda's
No
testing me, so yep, sidebar.
Hey, I will just tell you, I've been here forever, and every time we do one of these, I learn something new. So
Yeah, I just am sitting and watching.
Taking it all in and seeing
Yeah.
what you can remember. And
Right.
once you get in these screens and play around a little, a lot of it'll start clicking and making sense.
And
so.
just from watching Brenda work the past couple of days, a lot of it does look familiar. So
Good.
Yeah.
Good. And like Brenda said, you're always going to learn something new. There's even things that I read in the manual or learn somewhere and say, I didn't know that. So it's fine to not know everything at first. There's always more to learn. So that's up to Cal Future. Up to Cal Current looked the same. I didn't have any information in there. However, there are a few more options at the bottom of Current, like the F18, so Shift F8 pay report, and the S9, which is Control F9 work service days. So I do have screenshots of those in the PowerPoint where if you are making a change to somebody's pay or deduction withholdings and you want to see what they look like once you are processing the payroll, you would find that employee up here in Current and then hit Shift F8 and it would give you that little screenshot of pay report. So that's a pay report for just the person who you have found in this screen. Or you can also view a complete pay report of everybody in your payroll at a later step. And when we, like in a later class, when we actually run through processing a payroll from beginning to end, we'll look at this then again, and we'll look at the pay report. But that's one difference, those two options at the bottom between future and current. Because once you're in a current payroll, you can actually get a snapshot of what's being withheld, what's being paid, and verify that and make sure it all looks correct and make sure the days for service credit are what you expected. That one I really never used as much, but it might be helpful on like a contract payoff. So for the full year, you know, did you get the right number of days? Because you could always adjust at the end of the year if needed. So, and then future, the extra piece that it had was that effective date, that you don't have that in current. The next option on USP screen is attendance screen, number 11. I'm sorry, it looks like I thought we'd be done at 11:30, but we're running a little over, but we don't have a whole lot left. Attendance screen, I gave you guys a document because there's so much you can do in attendance screen. So if you're modifying records or adding records, it will be very helpful to you. But I don't know how much you guys do in attendance screen because I think you import a lot of your information. But attendance screen is where you would post attendance records for subs, attendance records for employees if they worked on a non-calendar day, absence information for employees, accumulation information. As people accumulate sick leave through that BENEC program, it would automatically add here. Adjustment information if needed. And let me go ahead and pull up Richard Gere. I think right there that was ZWR. We must have been on like Renee Zellweger or something. But her name wasn't appearing. But there's Richard Gere. So he has some attendance transactions. So you see those first two on the list. The transaction type is AT, telling me attendance. The category was attendance. Another option could be SB for sub. An absence of personal leave is the third line. An accrual for sick leave is the fourth. An accrual for personal leave is the fifth line. So if you hit F7, again, that's your help key. It's going to tell you what your options are. So we see on the screen examples of attendance, absence, and accumulation. There's also AD for adjustment, that you might have to enter an adjustment for retirement hours, retirement days, ODJFS weeks, or EMIS attendance or absence. The subcategory, well, this category is based on the transaction type. So right now I'm on the accumulation line and I can accumulate sick leave, vacation leave, or personal leave. If I go to the absence line in my category and hit F7, I have a lot more options because I can also be absent for professional leave, military leave, jury duty, and so forth. So you would enter attendance, absence, accumulation, and or adjustments here. Your information imports here from the time clock, kiosk, and ASOP. The date is the actual date of the absence or the date of the attendance. The length is the length of that absence. So if this employee is daily, you might see a unit of D, so this is days, or hourly, you might see hours, an H for hours, and then a number of hours. The appointment type column is used on an employee who does both certified and classified work. So it would be an appointment type of a 1 or a 2 accordingly. But if they only are certified or only are classified, that's optional and you don't have to fill that out. But if they do both, you would indicate 1 for certified or 2 for classified, just so that the credit goes to the correct retirement system. And then you see sub for ID. So if you're working with a sub's attendance, you could enter that employee ID of the person who they were in for. And then at the bottom of the screen, I see show pay date. That's the one I'm looking for. So S13, which is our control, shift F3, because the control changes it to the S. The shift adds 10 to F3. So if I hold down control and shift and F3, this sub for ID column is going to switch to a pay date column. So there just wasn't enough room on the screen for them to add that as a separate column. So you can flip between those two fields. And then that shows you during which pay this transaction was posted. So that could be helpful as you're looking at this screen also. So I have a couple attendances entered out here that have not pulled into a payroll yet. You also see a status over on the right. The P is indicating this transaction has been posted. The other two options would pertain to if you were deferring leave, which your district does not defer. But if you were deferring, you could see a D for deferred or an I for included before it was finally posted. But so if you're not deferred, then it's just going to be automatically posted when you enter it here. If you wanted to add a record, like in the other screen, when we added pay, the F12 is your add. So you would do F12. Since you're on Richard Gere, it's assuming that you're entering a record for him. You could change this employee ID if needed, and you could always use your F7 there to find a different employee, or you would enter your date, which I guess we can enter a current date. Attendances, if you're posting pay with that attendance, have to be tied to a job. Absences don't have to be tied to a job. So if we were posting, like let's do part of a sick day, then I'm just typing it in, but you can always hit F7 and pick your available options, and I'm using tab to move from one field to the next. And then I hit enter to save, and then you see that half of a sick day up here. At the bottom of the screen, you see that it is saying that you're not posting. That is related to posting pay. So if you were hand keying in here, like the attendance information, and you wanted to post pay at the same time, you could switch your posting mode. You would switch your posting mode with this S6 option, which is Control F6. And then maybe you'd say, I want to post to current, or I want to post to future. So if you're running a payroll right now, you could post to current. I don't have one in process. You could post to future, which is probably going to be common. If you do current/future, it's going to judge, do you have a payroll in process right now? If so, I'm going to post to current. If you don't have a payroll in process, I'm going to post to future. Direct post posts the pay in the future screen or in the current screen without you seeing it. So the other options kind of walk you into those screens and let you see what's happening. So I like those better. But the direct post would be quicker if you're confident that what it's entering is accurate. And the direct post current posts into current, direct post future posts into future, and the direct post current/future pays attention to if you have a payroll in process or not, like the post option. But I'm going to pick post future just so you can see what I mean by helping you post pay at the same time as attendance. If I now F12 to add an attendance record, my screen still looks the same. And we'll enter some pay for yesterday. We'll say ATAT. He was in attendance, and we'll do 1 day. Now when I hit enter, instead of saving my screen, oh, yep, I missed job number. Because we're posting pay, it requires to know which job we want to post the pay against. You could hit F7 there and pick from a list, or I'll just enter one. And then at the bottom of the screen, it's telling you what it's doing. And we picked post to future, so that's what's selected. That's what's gray right now. If I said, nope, typically I'm posting to future, but this one I do not want to post at all, there's no pay, I can change. Or I can arrow over and say, do the direct post this time. I don't want to see the future screen. But so by me picking the posting mode of future, it's defaulting my answer to post to future, so that I would just hit enter and it's going to walk me to that future screen, and it entered this line for me. So based on working 1 day, the system guessed that I wanted to pay him a regular pay type of 1 day at $50. It filled in the description of coach from my job screen, and the 2 hours pulled from job screen too, because I have 2 hours per day on the coaching job. So you could come up here and modify this if you needed to modify it, or if it was good, you'd just hit enter. But you could change a pay type, you could change your description, you could do whatever, then save. It included the information. I would F8 and that returns me to the attendance screen where I see that transaction sitting there. So if you're hand keying attendance that's associated with pay, it's a nice way to kind of do both at once by using your posting mode. You can set a preferred posting mode because every time I leave USP screen, so if I exit right now, if I F8 and F8 again, and then go back into USP screen, go back into attendance screen, you'll see once this screen pulls up, my posting mode is no longer selected. So I now have returned to a posting mode of no posting. If I would, it will only remember it while you're still in the same USP screen session if you select it from this S6 option. If you would like to set it so that it's always a certain way, you can do this S14, which is Control Shift F4. And you can pick that I always want my posting mode to be post future. Then every time I come in here, it will always be that. Or the other thing, Control Shift F4 that we saw that you can set with this preferred option is your cursor position. So right now, my cursor when I add a record is defaulting to the date field. If you would rather default to the employee ID, because you're hand keying a bunch of different employee IDs, you can change that. So you can control where your cursor is starting. If you're not hand keying a lot in attendance, then the preferred option might not be that useful, but if you have to key a lot, that might be helpful for you. I'll cancel out of that, and we'll go back and find Richard Kerrigan because he has more attendance than Hank Aaron. If I go over to this these mask fields, which when I was in deduction screen, I entered a mask of 803 to go to the New York City deduction on the default employee very quickly and skip all of the other deductions. This kind of works the same way. What do you want to find within this attendance screen? So if you have somebody and you're researching, did I accumulate their personal leave when they got hired? Then I could say, I just want to see personal leave accumulations and quickly narrow it down. Because as this employee's been with you for a long time, their attendance screen is going to be very long. Or you can do all accumulations in F11 and see sick leave and personal leave. You can do just attendances. You can do just certain types of absences, just absences. It's kind of up to you. So I'm filling information in that mask field and then hitting F11, and that's what's changing my screen. So if I hit F11 with nothing, I see all of my transactions. And then you could also enter a date. So let's say I just want to see anything May 1st or newer. Then F11, it narrows down your screen. So that mask field is helpful sometimes when you're researching or looking at somebody who's been with you for a long time and you want to narrow down that list in some way of what's displaying on your screen. So that's attendance screen. One thing I guess, let's look at the bottom that I didn't talk about was mass add. So mass add is Control F12. If I wanted to mass add a couple of days of attendance or absence, so let's do like vacation for next week. May 26th, 2020 is the first day of vacation, and we're going to do 4 days of vacation and absence type of VA for vacation, 1 day each. So the different field that we saw here was the number of days, because I'm mass adding, so that was a new field. And then we also have a field here to include weekends, yes or no. When you mass add, like if you were adding 10 days, do you want to skip weekends or include them? But if I go ahead and hit enter, you get a pop-up on your screen that's just confirming, or is this really what you mean to enter? So I actually got a warning saying you're entering vacation and that would cause his vacation leave to go negative. Are you sure of that? Let's just say yes. Okay. And then I got, because of my posting mode, let's cancel out. Because of my posting mode, let's change my posting mode. It was trying to post pay associated with an absence. Control F6. No posting. And then let's mass add again. Control F12. Sorry about that. So accept the negative balance. Oh, and there I did a mistake when I was typing. It was saying my length was greater than 1 day, which it was. So you're seeing these warnings at the bottom. So the system is going to help you hopefully not make mistakes like I was just making. And then enter, accept negative balance. And this, if there was not a warning about a negative balance, this would have been the only pop-up that I expected to see. So it's confirming what the system's doing. 4 records dated from May 26th through May 29th, not including weekends. Each record for 1 day are going to be added if you accept this. So if you accept, then 4 vacation records were added from May 26th through May 29th. So the mass add option might be helpful at times. Another option in this screen I really haven't talked about is switch. It's been in all of the screens. Some people use it all the time, some people never use it. So Shift F10 is how you get to F20. And then that asks you, which other USP screen do you want to jump to for this employee? It's just another way to navigate through the screens. So if we wanted to go back and look at his Ben screen, because we just made his vacation balance go negative, and let's take a look at that, we would hit F12. And because I'm in deferred, they're sitting down here. And when I run a payroll, it would make my vacation balance was 0. So my vacation balance wound up being -4 on Richard Gere. But so that was the switch option to jump from screens. The other option, of course, you could return to USP screen and go to the different screen. Or the third option, if you were working from browse screen, you could navigate the different screens that way. So those are just different options available to you. But that's pretty much attendance screen. There's a lot you can do in attendance screen, which is why we gave you that packet. So any questions on attendance screen? So we're down to the last 2 options, and they're pretty simple. The MUN screen, which is for municipality tax, number 12, you would come in here, and I have a screenshot in your PowerPoint if I had a payroll currently in process of more what it would look like. And this is just for the current payroll in process if you need to adjust somebody's city taxes. So if you have an employee that's going from building to building on an irregular basis and you could not control it on deduction screen with the job number or the percent of gross, you may have to come here and maintain the total gross portion of this current payroll that is applicable to a certain city tax rate. And then the system, by you updating which total gross amount is applicable to each city tax, the system would calculate then the new taxable gross and the new tax amount. So this is just if you need to maintain something on the current payroll, and it's normally on an employee that's in and out of multiple buildings some that are subject to taxes and some that are not. But if they're consistently in and out of buildings, you potentially could control this through the deduction screen, percentage gross field, or the job number field, so that you do not have to do this every pay. But it doesn't hurt to come here once you're running a payroll and take a look at people and see if there's anything you need to adjust. And when we actually run through a payroll in Payroll 102, then we'll look at this again so you can see it with current information in it. But to exit that and then go into option 13, ref screen, which is for refund of deduction. We talked about entering a negative error adjustment on somebody's deduction if you owed them money. For instance, if they are resigning or retiring and you withheld insurance for next month and they no longer need to have that withholding, so you need to refund it back. As long as they are still in a payroll, then you don't have to come to this screen, because the typical payroll process while you're paying them would look at that negative error adjustment on the deduction screen and process it at the same time as all other deductions and withholdings. However, if that person retired and resigned and you don't owe them any more money, you're not processing any pay after you entered that negative error adjustment on deduction screen, you would have to come here and add them to ref screen in order to issue them just a refund check for just a deduction. So you will not use this one very often, but potentially on employees when they have left your district, if on that final pay you processed, you didn't realize that you owed them a refund for some deduction withholding. But you'll probably only use this a handful of times the entire time you do payroll. It's not very common that you need it. So that's everything in the USP screen menu. And just to reaffirm and see those screens like one more time, I typically run through the process of adding a new employee, which we do from browse screen. So we'll go back to browse screen number 1. And like in the other screens, F12 is our add. We would see that at the bottom. So F12, we'll add a new employee. We'll add Albert Einstein. So I hit add and I entered that employee's last name, and the system is telling me they're not finding that employee by that last name. So I'm going to say, okay, I know I want to enter a new employee. So now I'm using my arrow keys to go down, and I'm going to add each one of these screens that we talked about: bio screen, dem screen, job screen, position screen. And you also see the deductions listed here. So let's go ahead and do bio screen, and we'll enter some information for Albert Einstein. And some of these fields I'll just skip, but we talked about the employee ID, so it should auto assign. The state assigned ID would be the state staff ID if you had that from their certificate, or if it was a classified employee, the EMIS system will assign a ZID. We enter their name and address information. And you see here the state of Ohio and a zip code pulled in. That's pulling in from my default employee. So I could go maintain that on my default employee if that's not what I wanted to happen. I could enter a school district code. We'll enter that 4507 for Newark, so that we'll see that pull in where we entered that earned income information on our default employee. You can enter phone number if you had that. I'll skip a few just so I don't bore you quite as much. The email address, again, is important for the kiosk and what the person is going to use to log in to that system. If you didn't know if you should be entering a 1 or a 2, an F or an M, you can hit F7 to see what your options are. So you're entering birth date, hire date, the last paid date will automatically populate. Should this employee receive a direct deposit or an emailed direct deposit notice? And I'm tabbing through my fields. Enter a check distribution. If you want to, print that check and have it categorized in some way, maybe your check distributions are numbers, maybe they're letters, maybe HS for high school, 001 for high school. That's district defined. Eligible, has he worked long enough that he's eligible to retire? Is he reportable to ODJFS? Is he reportable to EMIS? And if I hit enter, okay, so I'm getting an error message. You can see they're flashing on the screen that the employee ID cannot be blank. So I do not have in my sample database it set up, I guess, to assign an employee ID automatically. So I'll go ahead and type one in, but typically you should be able to let that auto assign. I'll enter now, so no other errors. It walked me to the second screen of bio screen to see if there's anything I wanted to update here. So if everything is complete, I can just hit enter. If you had anything else to update, you would enter that. And then it's popping up saying, do you want to assign a state assigned ID? So either this is a certified person that you should have had their state staff ID, and so you don't want to assign a generic ZID because you need to look that up. Or you want to go ahead and assign a ZID if this is a classified person, or even if this is a classified person, you can hit no now and it would be assigned at the time of the EMIS submission. I'm going to hit no because our database is not linked to EMIS and the sample database, and I get record added as requested. So the bio screen is done. I'm going to F8 and it returns me to browse screen add mode. You can see at the same time as adding bio screen, this also added dem screen because that information is kind of shared between the two. So you could access the dem screen to add those few fields that are needed for EMIS reporting by arrowing down to that line and clicking enter, and then tabbing through to enter Hispanic, Latino, yes or no, and a race. These other races are for Hispanic, Latino, yes. Enter semester hours and education level, which I have pulling in from my default employee. And enter total years experience, authorized years of experience, principal years if applicable. Enter any information there and hit enter. Okay, so my ECE, if I hit F7, I missed that field. We're gonna go ahead and hit an asterisk for not applicable, but you would complete that if it were applicable to the position that you're hiring somebody for. Hit enter. And no, I'm not gonna assign the ID at this point. I had the warning message at the bottom of my screen that said changes made as requested. And then I hit F8 to return to my browse screen add mode. I then can arrow down and add a job screen. I'm going to add job 1. And we will just go ahead and build kind of like a typical teacher job. And I could use my F7 to look up my position codes, or I could look it up in the EMIS manual, but a typical teacher is a 230. This is a regular position, a 1 for certificated. Report to EMIS, yes. Low grade, high grade, which is required on certain positions, but not all teaching positions. The separation reason, it might be helpful if you had that filled out on your default employee because I think it's going to require an asterisk, not a blank. Your building IRN. We'll see if this is a building IRN in our sample database. I think it is, but it may not be. You can also F7 on your building and departments. Those are lists that you as a district maintain elsewhere. Or if you know your building and department, you can just type it in. Then the position start date and the contract start date. So when is he starting in the position? When are you starting to pay the position? The contract start date gets updated every year. The position start date stays the same. A contract stop date, terminated date, last raise date if applicable, 450 for STRS, 1 for active. Pay plan, I think the sample database is semi-monthly. Pay group will do an age, and again, a lot of these fields you can hit F7 and see a list. We will enter a calendar and a calendar start date of his first work day. The calendar stop date is when they are finished with you. The job type is for the supplemental taxing option, and this is not a supplemental job. An assignment area if needed for this EMIS position code. Your money, where are you paying this person from? I'll just do local and 100%. And is this person eligible for sick, vacation, or personal? If I hit enter, it's going to walk me to screen 2 of job screen, where I can enter an obligation, which is what this person will be paid, a contract amount. I'm not putting the full year salary schedule step because this person is only contracted for part of the year. So whenever anybody starts with you, middle of the year, beginning of the year, those 2 amounts are going to match unless you have done a mid-year contract adjustment. Then I'm tabbing through the fields that will be updated by the system. I'll go enter the number of pays that I want to stretch this pay over and the number of work days that I'm paying for. Yes or no, do you want this spread equally over the pays? Hours per day, retirement hours per day. Should this be paid, is this person paid daily or hourly? And then the pay per period, and the daily rate. The system can automatically calculate for you based on the information that's on the screen now. So I think it's a good double check to leave it blank and see if the system comes up with the same thing that you expected. So I'm just going to tab through and fill out. We need an FTE. So we'll say this is 1 full-time person. When I hit enter, I get a warning at the bottom of my screen saying the pay per period and the unit amount have been calculated. I would compare that to my calculations and hit enter to save if I agree. When I hit enter, it walks me to screen 3 of job screen, and most of this information is filled out by the system as you run payroll. So I'm just going to enter, and then I get confirmation that my job screen was added as requested. When I F8, I'm back at that browse screen add mode. And you can see as you're working through this add mode, it's really not going to require you to enter or add every screen. Even the ones that say required, it's going to let you leave here and not do it. It's just trying to help you, walk you through the process from beginning to end. So I like to work from top to bottom. So position screen, you could go in there and enter those EMIS reportable fields. So we would want to tab over and enter the status that this is a current continuing employee, and the qualified paraprofessional and highly qualified professional development, if applicable. Those are asterisks in my system by default, but you would fill that out on the person if needed. I get confirmation that my changes were made as requested. I F8 to return to my add mode. I arrow down and enter on the pay screen, and I'll add 1 account for this job. And we'll see if we hit an account. I don't know if these are correct OPUs in this. We'll see if we get an error. We'll do 100%. We'll do an account status of active. And then you would answer the board dis and leave projection flags as desired. And enter. Okay, so I'm getting a warning that this operational unit does not exist on the master file. So it's going to let me enter and it will create it, or that would be an alert to me that I've made a typo potentially and I need to correct that OPU. And unfortunately, I don't know the account codes that we have in our sample database that closely, so I'm just going to see if I can find another one. Maybe we will pick. Okay, so it accepted this one. So this added our pay account, which you would be looking up another employee that left the position and using a similar pay account, or consulting your treasurer or Brenda to determine what pay account you should be paying this individual out of. And when the pay screen is entered, if you had to split their pay amongst multiple pay accounts, you would add another record. Or if you had a fixed amount that you wanted to charge for a portion of their pay, you would add another record. I just added one, so I'm gonna F8 to return to add mode, arrow down, and add a Ben screen for this employee. We'll do their benefit based on daily. They'll accumulate 1.25 sick days per month. If your district has a district defined maximum, you can enter that. If you are going to start using the system to track your advance max, you might want to enter that. The personal leave reset value is most likely 3 that you reset to every year. A couple of our districts have 4 days for personal leave, but most have 3. And you see I'm skipping balance on these because I'm not entering a balance for this individual. I'm just setting up the reset values, the maximums, and the accumulations so that those work accurately when those programs are used going forward. And maybe they get 1.25 vacation days per month as well, so they earn 3 weeks of vacation a year. Oh, no. We said this was a teacher, so they're not eligible for vacation, and it's right there. So we'll leave vacation blank. So once you have your information entered, you go ahead and hit enter. You get record added as requested. If you needed to accumulate sick leave for an employee who is starting manually, or give them so many personal days for starting middle of the year or start of the year, and you've already ran the program for all of your employees, then when you exit here, you would add that through attendance screen later. But you can't really do that on Ben screen. You have to accumulate that on attendance screen. So when Ben screen is complete, we will keep moving through the add mode and do the deductions. But if you had to do accumulations, you would just want to remember to access this person's attendance screen when you're finished adding the employee. So the deductions, you see some that say required over to the right. You maintain that as a district, and we will talk about that. I don't remember if that's in our Payroll 102 or Payroll 103 session, but in a different screen on the system, you can indicate which of these deductions appear with add only, or add and required, or that they don't appear at all. We don't have every single deduction listed here, and maybe you have some deductions that just aren't very common. You don't use them very often and you don't want them displayed here. Maybe you want all of your deductions displayed here. Some you want to make sure you don't forget, so you want the system telling you it's required. And others are just optional, like if they're enrolling in insurance. But you control this message and which deductions are displaying here in the USPS DAT menu dead name screen, which we look at in another later session of the Payroll 101 series. So to arrow down and add these ones that are required, we will go ahead and enter on federal and complete any additional fields that are needed. So marital status, filing status, again, you can use your F7 to look those up. You'll be having the new W-4 form completed on your new employees, and then you would fill out any of these 4 fields based on if they filled them out on the new W-4. Pension plan is automatic, so that's all I need, other than I guess I didn't do yes or no there. and then I save the federal record. I exit, arrow down, and do the same for state tax. So you could enter exemptions if they fill that out on their form. If it was 0, you honestly could just hit enter and save, but we'll enter 1 for an example. Enter to save, F8 to return to add mode, arrow down, and enter the New York City tax, which the percentage in the work-based option is pulling in from my default employee. Enter to save. You can add Heath tax if that person resided there. That's my next one as a courtesy. Life insurance, if your district does board paid life, STRS. So life insurance, you would hopefully have this configured to pull in the board share. So on a normal employee, all you would be doing would be selecting enter to add it and then enter to save it. Return, and the life insurance was added that easily. And then I see 450 for STRS board share here. I do not see 400 for SERS here. And that's because when I added the teacher job, I said that it was subject to 450 STRS. So the system tries to help you and make your life easier because we don't have a job subject to SERS. We're not even seeing SERS on this list. The system is narrowing things down for us. So I'm going to go ahead and enter this STRS amount. There are a few fields over there on the right that are required that are blank, so I'll go over and fill those in. We'll do. And then I exit. You could add any other deductions as needed or page down to continue to the list of your remaining deductions. We need to add the employee share of retirement. I'll go ahead and update that to be the current 14% and save. I could go edit my default employee to make that be accurate going forward. F8 to exit, page down again. You can add any of these other deductions, but we'll add Medicare because you have to add Medicare on everybody, or FICA, potentially on some people as well. Like your board members and students can elect to participate in Social Security instead of retirement, so you might have to add a record here for FICA as well. But we will just enter to save because everything pulled in fine from my default employee. Page down, add a direct deposit for Mr. Einstein, 100%. You could F7 here and pick your pre-note option since you guys pre-note. So the 22 that I see on the screen is the checking account. If I do Control F8 to do next, I see the rest of my list. And my pre-note for checking account is 23. So I'll exit and do that. I could F7 if we use the XREF to pick my routing number, or I could have hand typed that in. And then I'll enter a bank account number and save. F8 to exit and return to add mode. Page down to see my last few deductions. And we'll do the school district income tax, where you can see where we modified the default employee to say earned income, which I'm not saying that that's accurate for Newark school district income tax, but just showing that as an example. And when I save his record, I hit enter and it's telling me you listed exemptions on the state record, and we're pulling that in automatically because the system is trying to help you. But on an earned income tax, you would have to space that out. So if I just use my space bar and do 2 spaces and then hit save, it saves a 0. So just so you can see what that is going to look like. And then F8 to return. You would keep adding any that you needed or any that your district required. But even though there are some here on the list that are still listed as required that I haven't added, you can see the ones that have been added because there's information over here to the right showing what I did add. But even though these are not required, I can still exit this add mode. I can still F8 and say I'm done, and the system is not going to make me enter those other deductions. So you still need to be cautious of that to make sure you're adding at least the minimum required, like your taxes, your board share and employee share of retirement, your Medicare, to make sure that you're not missing anything. So there's still some human error potentially in there, so you have to be careful with that. That add mode, we recommend you add from browse screen. You can go into the screens and add them individually, but the browse screen at least gives you that view where it kind of tries to help you not forget a screen or not forget a deduction, and you don't have that view if you're adding in the other screens directly. So adding an employee will definitely get you familiar with all of the fields on all of those screens that we looked at today. Do you have any questions about any of those fields or screens or navigating anything that we did look at today?
No, I don't think so.
They'll get more familiar and a lot easier and not so scary once you've done them a few times.
And I think like the first time you're in reflections, like I said, the first time you look at USP screen, if it were me, I would go in and pull up myself. And your information is familiar to you, so you're going to start making sense of the different fields by seeing that. And then the first time you add an employee, if you have two screens at your desk, I would pull up an existing employee in one screen and have the session open for your new employee in the next screen, and kind of use that prior employee as an example. But you're gonna spend a lot of your time in USP screen updating records, making deduction changes, updating jobs. We talk about other menus and other sessions of the like Payroll 102 and Payroll 103. Payroll 102, we look at running a payroll. Payroll 103, we look at like maintaining job calendars and maintaining deductions, not on the individual employee, like on the larger scale. So there's a lot more to look at, but this is hopefully enough to get your feet wet. And when you log into reflections the first time, look around. It'll be different maneuvering, using your keyboard, not being able to rely on your mouse.
Yeah, fortunately, I've worked with systems like this in the past, so
Okay.
I'm sure
Good.
once I start clicking around, it'll come back to me.
And once you do maneuver in here, like you won't even have to think about it. Like your fingers will just tab. Like you don't even have to think of how many times you have to enter a number or a tab, because you do get very used to it very quickly. So anything else that you would like me to show today? I'm sorry we ran over. I must have talked too much.
No, that was good.
Okay.
Anything that you think I missed in these screens or you want me to show in addition?
No, I think that was good.
So, I mean, you have your work cut out for you, but if you just take it a day at a time and, have an open mind with it, you'll do fine. And I think Brenda agrees, I also say you don't learn payroll in a week or 2 weeks. It takes a year.
Exactly.
To see everything that you're going to see, because you see new contracts one time of year, you see payoffs, you see mid-year contract adjustments, you see W-2s at a different time of year, you see the STRS advance at fiscal year end, you see all of these different things throughout the year. And so by the time you've made it a year, you've just seen everything for the first time. And then the second year, you're finally repeating a couple of those steps. Of course, your per pay stuff is going to start to make sense sooner, but those different things that you only see once a year, the second year, you can actually make sense of them. So if you like to learn and you approach it with an open mind, payroll just takes a little time to learn, but it will eventually all make sense. The one tip that I do have, if you don't like to call in, if you call in, they'll always get you to somebody who is available with our team who can help. But if you like to email, I would prefer you email the team. If you send the email to fiscal@laca.org, then it emails all of us, which right now that's me, Mary, and Dean is also on our email to monitor that. So just to make sure you get the quickest assistance that you can, because like I've literally had my email closed down while I was training with you. So Mary's watching email right now, but if anybody emailed me directly, they may be wondering why I haven't replied. And I normally try to put my out of office on even when I'm teaching, but I did not do that today. So, or if you email us and don't hear from us, call or emails, email again the team or something, but that'd be my one tip, like either call or email the team, especially if it's really urgent.
When you're emailing that fiscal@laca.org, they are, I feel, just as responsive as if you called them and got them on the phone, unless they're in a meeting. And if they're in training or something, they still get the message and they'll get back to you as soon as it's over. So, even, and again, sometimes we just have to remember, and I tell myself this all the time, you guys have jobs other than just waiting for us to call with a crisis in our life. So we sometimes forget that.
And even when we're in a meeting, like right now when I was training, I wasn't watching my email, but if Mary and I are both in the same meeting, one of us has our email open. So like the payroll roundtable that we were doing the other day that you sat in on, the one that wasn't teaching was monitoring emails. So if somebody was urgently needing something, we were still able to help them.
They multitask well, Courtney.
So, but that's my tip would be like starting out with us. I would say email the team or call in if you have something really urgent so that you're just not waiting extra long.
Okay.
Right.
But
well done, Carrie. Well done.
Okay, well, thank you for taking time and running over with me. I'm sorry I talked so much.
No problem.
Okay,
okey-doke.
well, I appreciate you. You're wonderful. And Courtney, I will see you Tuesday.
Yep, I'll see you Tuesday. You guys have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Say bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.